Chapter 30:18. It's just a small thing that's not worth mentioning to me. You're willing to exchange your life for it. So, what do I have to be afraid of? Yi Shiwen replied, with an indifferent look on his face. The one-horned man suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know why, but he felt that Yi Shiwen wasn't joking when he said this. He knew that Yi Shiwen wasn't bluffing him. If he really escaped with the Thunder Source, then he would most likely die. He felt as if he couldn't escape from Yi Shiwen's warning even if he fled the entire fortune world. He suddenly felt a little strange. He had concealed his cultivation very deeply. However, he knew that he had already stepped into the quasi-emperor realm. So, how could this person be so terrifying? He had been cultivating for a long time. So, he didn't believe that this was an illusion. After all, it was impossible for a practitioner of his level to be an illusion. Of course. He, distinguished guest, you must be joking. The one-horned man quickly replied with a smile. He had just been joking a while ago. Now, he was trying to curry favor with Yi Shiwen. This Thunder Source wasn't very useful for him. However, it was very precious for a practitioner of the Thunder Path. So, it was needless to say how precious it was. This kind of thing couldn't be compared with ordinary heavenly treasures. It could be said to be priceless. It was definitely enough as a deposit. Since there are no more questions, then I'll take my leave first, Yi Shiwen said. He could feel that a greedy look had appeared in the eyes of some of the stall owners when he had casually taken out the Thunder Source. In fact, some of them would have robbed him on the spot if they weren't afraid of his unfathomable strength. What was integrity in such a place? Could it be eaten? Take care, distinguished guest, take care, the one-horned man said in a flattering manner. He quickly put away the Thunder Source in his bosom, and then sent a message to his senior brother, who was far away in the distance. Yi Shiwen was expressionless. However, the one-horned man's actions were all under his control. They were really good to be able to bring their merchants to this place. Suddenly, a knight descended from the sky. He was riding a ferocious beast whose whole body was burning with flames. Everyone's expression suddenly turned dignified when they saw the emblem on the knight's body. May I ask if you were the Heavenly Law Union's emissary? Someone gathered his courage and asked. That's right. I've received an order from the Heavenly Tao Alliance's alliance leader. Anyone who sees this woman and reports the news will be rewarded handsomely. If anyone can capture her, our alliance leader has said that he can make an exception and recruit them into the Heavenly Tao Alliance. The knight looked around at the crowd and said, What? Bring in the Heavenly Taoism? Many people couldn't remain calm when they heard this news. Everyone knew what kind of existence the Heavenly Law School was. It was one of the few unparalleled giants in the world. There were countless experts in the Heavenly Law School. Among them, the headmaster of the Heavenly Law School was known to be an existence that could contend with celestial venerables. Many of the people who set up stalls here were independent cultivators who had appeared around the Empyrean Pole Island this time. Their cultivation was rather limited, mainly because they did not have a master. There were very few people like the Horned Man who had already reached the quasi-emperor realm. Most of them were actually divine kings, and they might not even reach the quasi-emperor realm in their entire lives. Even in the fortune world, the difference between a god king and a quasi-emperor was as great as the distance between heaven and earth. Therefore, this order was extremely attractive to them. Everyone looked over and saw that the image of a woman had appeared on the palm of the horseman. It was a young girl who seemed to be around 17 or 18 years old. She was wearing a light purple dress and holding a long sword in her hand. She looked extremely valiant and threatening. A sharp sword could destroy everything, even through the image. May I ask the honorable envoy, what is the name of this woman? Someone asked with an excited look on his face. It should be known that if they could capture this woman, they would be able to reach the sky in a single bound. In the future, they would also have the opportunity to reach the quasi-emperor realm. As for the sovereign emperor realm, it was not something that they could hope to reach. They did not even dare to hope for it. Even in the vast fortune world, the sovereign emperor realm was still very high and unreachable. For most people, the experts of the sovereign emperor realm could only be imagined. This bitch's name is Qin Wugo. Once you have any news of this bitch, you can send a message to our alliance immediately. our alliance will immediately send people to kill her. The horseman said as he glanced at the crowd. Could it be that Qin Wugo is related to that person? While everyone was suddenly enlightened, the one-horned man suddenly thought of something and immediately became somewhat frightened. He seemed to have thought of something. If this was really the case, it was no wonder that the Heavenly Law Alliance wanted to kill Qin Wugo. This matter involved an ancient past. If he was not a disciple of a famous sect, he might not even know about it. Countless years ago, an emperor appeared out of nowhere and was suppressed by the Heavenly Law Alliance at that time. Unexpectedly, the Heavenly Law Alliance was not able to suppress this emperor. Instead, they were repeatedly slapped in the face. In the end, even the sect leader of the Heavenly Law Alliance was unable to do anything to this strange person. In the end, he left calmly. And that person also seemed to have the surname Qin. However, at that time, everyone was shocked. No one knew why this emperor with the surname Qin wanted to cause such a ruckus in the Heavenly Law Alliance. However, from that day on, the Heavenly Law Alliance had secretly issued a warrant for this emperor with the surname Qin. However, as time passed, this emperor with the surname Qin never appeared again. Therefore, many people had long forgotten about him. You actually know? The horseman said as he looked at the one-horned man with a rather surprised expression. This one is the Heavenly Business Alliance's star merchant Z. The one-horned man saw that the horseman's killing intent had risen in the horseman's heart and immediately blurted out his identity. Sure enough, the horseman's killing intent immediately dissipated after hearing the horseman's identity. Although their Heavenly Law Alliance was tyrannical, they didn't want to offend the Heavenly Business Alliance. There was no need to do so. Instead, it would make them enemies. The Heavenly Business Alliance was one of the giants in another domain of the Fortune Divine dynasty. So, it's a Taoist brother from the Heavenly Business Alliance. If Taoist brother has any news about this matter, please inform me immediately. The horseman's expression became much better as he said, Well said, well said. If I know anything, I will certainly inform you. The one-horned man, Star Merchant Z, said. However, his heart was filled with disdain. Their Heavenly Business Alliance didn't support their disciples getting involved in such disputes. Harmony brought wealth, and that was their way of survival. Although the Heavenly Law Alliance was powerful, the emperor with the surname Qin who had rendered the Heavenly Law Alliance helpless was also not a simple character. If this emperor were to cause havoc in the Heavenly Business Alliance again, the old monsters in the alliance would definitely tear him apart and swallow him whole. Heavenly Law Alliance? Yi Shiwen suddenly remembered that this was an alliance formed by the disciples of the Heavenly Law sect. In addition to the disciples of the Heavenly Law sect, there were also many disciples of other forces attached to the Heavenly Law sect. It was one of the strongest alliances on the Heavenly Pole Island. However, this thought only flashed in his mind for a moment. Yi Shiwen continued to walk outside. Wait a minute. The one wearing cyan clothes? Suddenly, a huge beast's claw fell from the sky and directly grabbed towards Yi Shiwen's direction. This beast's claw was covered in endless flames. It seemed as if it had come from the depths of hell and directly grabbed towards Yi Shiwen. Bang! Yi Shiwen stopped. This beast's claw had torn a huge crack in the ground in front of him. Yi Shiwen slowly turned his head. A killing intention flashed in his eyes the moment he turned his head. The ominous beast that the horseman was riding on was carrying the horseman towards Yi Shiwen. I haven't finished speaking, and you dare to leave. You are very courageous. The horseman looked at Yi Shiwen and said in a bad mood, Heavenly Law Alliance? I advise you not to be so shameless. Yi Shiwen slowly said. An angry look suddenly appeared on the horseman's face. Yi Shiwen's words were clearly implying that he was a fox exploiting the tiger's might. He had originally wanted to teach this guy a lesson, but now a killing intention had emerged in his heart. You are very courageous. You actually dare to oppose our Heavenly Law Alliance. Now, kneel down and admit your mistake. Then, cut off one of your arms, and we will forget about this matter. The horseman coldly looked at Yi Shiwen and said, in his opinion, Yi Shiwen had made him lose face in front of everyone, so he had to pay an absolute price. So what if I oppose your Heavenly Law Alliance? Cut off one of your arms? Just you? Yi Shiwen coldly smiled and said, "Ah, that's right. What's so great about the Heavenly Law Alliance? Not to mention, it's just a small fry who has come from nowhere. He is using the tiger skin of the Heavenly Law Alliance as a banner." Suddenly, a silvery laughter resounded from the void. A scantily clad young girl stepped out from the void. There was a teasing smile on this young girl's face. However, her expression was extremely charming. Everyone present on the scene couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva along with her laughter. It seemed as if they had been affected by her charm. Her charm technique is pretty good, Yi Shiwen secretly evaluated in his heart. This young girl was born to be charming. Moreover, she had also cultivated a charm technique. It would be very difficult for people of the same level to resist her charm technique. They would be affected by it. However, Yi Shiwen had already become an emperor. So, this kind of charm technique couldn't affect him. It could only cleanse his mind. He wouldn't be affected. That young girl's voice had barely faded when she looked at Yi Shiwen in a strange manner. It seemed as if she hadn't expected that this young man wouldn't be affected by her charm technique. She was very clear about the extent of her charm technique. Almost no one in the same generation could resist it. However, this young man was very calm. Chapter 30:19. She had an innate charm. Moreover, she had also cultivated a top-notch charm technique. So, it could be said that her attraction towards the opposite sex had reached the pinnacle. Only a few ascetic cultivators could resist her charm. Could it be that this ordinary-looking young man is also an ascetic cultivator? However, he had an innate temperament on his body, even though he didn't look amazing. This made him look even more attractive. Charm technique. A wisp of blood overflowed from the corner of that knight's mouth. He had bitten his tongue at this critical moment to maintain his sobriety. Fairy Tian Miao, do you want to oppose our Heavenly Tao Union? Don't use the Heavenly Tao Union to scare people. Do you think you can scare anyone? You see, this man isn't afraid of your Heavenly Tao Union. The scantily clad girl smiled as she directed the topic of conversation towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen's brows slightly wrinkled. He wasn't afraid. However, this girl had directed the topic of conversation towards him. It was obvious that she wasn't a good person. Humph! You dare to look down on our Heavenly Tao Union? I think you're courting death. However, Fairy Tian Miao, don't be complacent. I advise you not to intervene. Otherwise, I'm sorry, the knight said in a cold voice. His expression had become firm once again. Intervene? How can I not intervene? Wugo and I are best sisters. Your Heavenly Tao Union dares to hunt her down. How can I not intervene? Fairy Tian Miao said with a smile, as if she was talking about something unimportant. However, the killing intent in her words made everyone feel a chill down their spines. Who do you think you are? You dare to speak to me in such a manner? Even your Union Lord doesn't dare to speak to me in such a manner. I'll take your head today as a punishment. I want to see what you can do if you offend your Heavenly Tao Union. Fairy Tian Miao's appearance was peerlessly beautiful. Her voice was also as pleasant as a silver bell. Her face was full of smiles. However, her words were extremely ruthless. You dare! The knight suddenly became a bit flustered. He suddenly remembered that Fairy Tian Miao was a famous witch. Many so-called elders of the Heavenly Tao Union had died at her hands. Even his Union Lord wasn't 100% sure that he could stop her. Why wouldn't I dare? Fairy Tian Miao smiled faintly, revealing two beautiful dimples at the corners of her mouth. She looked even sweeter, but her words made the hearts of everyone in the market turn even colder. What kind of joke was this? This was a peerless star of misfortune. Many people began to wonder just who Goddess Tian Miao was. She was definitely not someone to be trifled with. I think everything should be first come, first served. Suddenly, Yi Shiwen opened his mouth and said, I should be the one to kill him first. Yi Shiwen's expression was extremely indifferent. It was as if he was saying that he would trample an ant to death. There weren't many emotional fluctuations in his expression. You? The knight was startled and angry at the same time. Fairy Tian Miao was one thing, but who was this person? He had dared to say that he would kill him. He couldn't tolerate this. Otherwise, who would listen to the heavenly Tao Union in the future? Well, you're just a small fry anyway. It doesn't matter if I kill you or not. I will let you go if you can kill him. Otherwise, I won't care if you get killed by him. Fairy Tian Miao said with a smile. Her voice was very pleasant to listen to. It sounded like the tinkling of a mountain spring. Well, this is what you said. The knight who had said that he wasn't afraid suddenly revealed a pleasantly surprised expression on his face. Facing this green-robed man was better than facing Fairy Tian Miao. Boy, you're going to die today. The knight promptly turned towards Yi Shiwen. It seems that I'm easy to bully. Yi Shiwen slightly sneered. Heavenly Tao Union? Who does it think it is? It dares to claim to represent the heavenly Tao? A toad is yawning. What a big tone. Yi Shiwen only acted according to his heart. He would hate a person even more if he didn't like them. You are courting death. The knight suddenly became furious. The ominous beast under his crotch seemed to have sensed the anger of its master, and crazily rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Boom! 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 This ominous beast seemed to be running on the ground with the imposing aura of a magnificent army. This ominous beast was also a quasi-emperor level ominous beast. The imposing aura of the knight on the back of this ominous beast had risen to the peak. He was a disciple of the heavenly Tao Union, so his strength couldn't be faked. He wasn't as strong as Fairy Tian Miao, but he had firmly stepped into the quasi-emperor realm. Bang! One man and one mount rushed forward, but they had the terrifying, imposing aura of a magnificent army. Their cooperation was extremely tacit. They had already fought countless times, so their combined strength was far greater than the sum of their parts. Countless people in the bazaar felt their hearts tremble. It seemed as if they had seen a peerless, ominous beast rushing towards them. They thought, the disciples of the heavenly Tao Union are really outstanding. Even such an unknown disciple has the cultivation of a quasi-emperor. It seemed like that person was going to die. Xing Shangzi was also at a loss. In his opinion, Yi Shiwen was his big client. If this big client died, then he would cry his eyes out. A super nouveau riche could casually use the thunder source. In his opinion, Yi Shiwen was indeed a nouveau riche. It wasn't easy to meet such a person anywhere and at any time. No, I can't let my distinguished guest die. Xing Shangzi immediately made a decision. He didn't need to intervene in the matter between the heavenly Tao Union and Qin Wugo. But this person was his big client. He wouldn't be able to find another one if he lost one. Just as he was about to make a move, that man and one mount had already rushed in front of Yi Shiwen. But Yi Shiwen seemed to be stupid. He didn't move at all. Just when everyone was about to cry out in alarm, they saw that Yi Shiwen finally moved. His palm slashed out like a blade. Bang! There was a loud rumbling sound. It was the sound of the fierce beast that the knight was riding on falling to the ground. It was unknown when its head had flown up high. A human-like look of confusion and disbelief appeared on that ferocious face. The knight wasn't prepared at all. The fierce beast he was riding on died tragically. His whole body flew towards Yi Shiwen under the inertia. There was a long spear in his hand. He maintained his momentum and stabbed towards Yi Shiwen, but he only saw a white light flying in front of his eyes. Then he felt a sharp pain coming from his chest. His whole body flew out. Poochie! He discovered that there was a huge crack on his chest. His Iron Man armor, which was refined with endless magical materials, was like tofu. It was easily cut by someone. It couldn't protect him. Bang! Then the knight instantly fell to the ground. He struggled for a while, but there was no way for him to get up. His vitality seemed to have been completely drained in an instant. One strike killed two great quasi-emperors. Everyone was stunned. They saw that Yi Shiwen didn't make any big moves at all. It was just a casual strike, and the two great quasi-emperors were killed in an instant. This person was simply too tyrannical. Especially Xing Shangzi, he was dumbfounded. He knew that if he were to make a move, he could barely stop this knight at most. He couldn't pose a more fatal threat to this knight at all. But this person killed the knight almost effortlessly. At this time, he finally understood what this person meant when he said that he would exchange his life for the knight's. If he were to swap places with the knight at this time, perhaps he wouldn't fare much better. He would also be killed in a second. Who the hell is this person? How can he be so terrifying? Even the eldest senior brother of the Sky Commerce Alliance doesn't have such tyrannical strength. And not far from Yi Shiwen, Fairy Tian Miao almost saw with her own eyes how Yi Shiwen killed the two great quasi-emperors in a second. Her heart seemed to have stopped for a moment. Although she was confident that she could easily kill this knight and his ominous beast, the so-called easily didn't mean that he was killed in a second. Yes, this could only be described as a second. She seemed to have never heard of someone who could kill a quasi-emperor in a second. Even her cultivation, which was infinitely close to the Emperor realm, couldn't do such a thing. Could it be that this person was an Emperor realm expert? No, Emperor realm experts couldn't enter the Celestial Pole Island at all. The restriction of the Celestial Pole Island had a huge restriction on Emperor realm experts, so it was impossible for them to enter. Moreover, there were people guarding and inspecting the outside of the Celestial Pole Island. It was impossible for an Emperor realm expert to sneak in. So who the hell was this person? Yi Shiwen's expression didn't change. Even if he had been seriously injured, it would be a bit difficult for him to deal with the Emperor realm expert. However, it would only take one move to deal with a quasi-emperor. I will come again after half a year. I hope that you will have prepared the medicinal materials by then. Yi Shiwen looked at Xing Shangzi and said, Of course, but you have killed the people of the Sky Commerce Alliance. They won't let you go. Xing Shangzi suddenly felt that his mouth was dry. He hadn't recovered from the shock of a moment ago. He smiled bitterly and said, Then let them come. I want to see how many of them are easy to kill. Yi Shiwen didn't care at all. They were just a group of quasi-emperors. How could they overturn the sky? The gap between an Emperor realm expert and a quasi-emperor expert was like the gap between heaven and earth. It was really too big. He could ignore them even if he was seriously injured. After saying this, Yi Shiwen turned around and left the market, leaving behind a dumbfounded crowd. Yi Shiwen walked in the forest and suddenly stopped. He said, Come out. I don't know why Fairy Tian Miao is following me. I just want to see who you are. How can you be so powerful? Her voice sounded like a silver bell, like a mountain spring. It was crisp and pleasant to listen to. Chapter 30:20. Yi Shiwen stopped and turned around. As expected, Fairy Tian Miao was following behind him. She was walking lightly on the ground, as if she was walking on air, and there was a bright smile on her face. Don't you know that curiosity is the root of danger? Yi Shiwen said indifferently. Fairy Tian Miao was following him, and he had discovered her from the very beginning. I only know that curiosity is the beginning of unlocking all secrets. You're really special, Fairy Tian Miao said bluntly. Oh, why do you say so? Yi Shiwen stopped and began to walk forward again. No one in the bazaar dared to stop this evil star. Just now, Yi Shiwen's ferocious demeanor of killing a quasi-emperor with a single strike had frightened everyone. Even the star merchants who organized this market were frightened. They didn't know where this peerless malefic star had come from, and he didn't even give face to the Heavenly Tao sect. He almost fainted at the thought of a colossus like the Heavenly Tao sect. I don't know either. In any case, you're quite special. You're a bit like the super elders of our Nine Nether sect who live in seclusion. However, their temperament isn't as strong as yours. Fairy Tian Miao smiled like a flower. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, who would have known that this was a malefic star who would kill people whenever she wanted? Nine Nether sect? Another super sect. No wonder they dare to challenge the Heavenly Tao Union, Yi Shiwen said after thinking for a while. Previously, Fairy Jiangzhu had briefed him on the situation of the Fortune God dynasty. She had mentioned that other than the divine capital of the Fortune God dynasty, there were also 4 heavenly venerables that shook the world. They represented the power of the Fortune God dynasty. However, there were many sects that were independent and were tyrants. Both the Heavenly Tao sect and the Nine Nether sect were among them. Among them, the Heavenly Tao sect was the leader of many sections. They were the most powerful, and their sect master was said to be able to challenge the celestial masters. Huh? So you know how powerful the Heavenly Tao sect is. Since you know how powerful the Heavenly Tao sect is, you still dare to challenge the Heavenly Tao sect. Could it be that you also have a great background? Fairy Tian Miao quickly caught up with Yi Shiwen. She had a bright smile on her face, but she was actually extremely shocked. She had almost lost track of the person in front of her. The person before him seemed to be right in front of him, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't catch up with him. This discovery almost caused her to jump in fright. She, Fairy Tian Miao, could be said to be famous in the world for a period of time, and her status was comparable to the sect masters and exalts of some small sections. In fact, she was even ranked at the top of the reserve imperial monarchs list below the imperial monarchs. Her cultivation could be said to be profound. But why couldn't he keep up with this green-robed man? His movement technique wasn't anything special, but as he walked, he suddenly felt like he couldn't keep up. It was as if there was a maze in front of him, isolating him. He was clearly in front of him, but it felt like he was separated by countless worlds. In the end, she was forced to quietly raise her power, and only then did she barely manage to keep up. She was secretly shocked. Yi Shiwen was a little surprised to see that Fairy Tian Miao was able to keep up with him. He didn't use any movement technique, but he was an emperor monarch and all laws were under his control. For him, it didn't matter whether he used movement techniques or not. An ordinary quasi-emperor wouldn't even be able to see his figure. But Fairy Tian Miao was able to keep up with him. This strength was almost on par with Yi Wudi, Yi Mo, and the others in the past. However, there was still a huge gap between her and Yi Shiwen, who hadn't become an emperor monarch yet. Yi Shiwen was almost the strongest expert below the emperor monarch level at that time. He was also the strongest if all the extraordinary experts that had appeared in the universe were included. Therefore, he was terrifyingly tyrannical in every emperor monarch level, and it was because he had laid a good foundation. It's best if you know as little as you can about me. You stayed in that market for a long time, so you should know that I was buying medicinal materials. You should have guessed that I wanted to heal myself. I was injured by a very powerful person, so it won't do you any good if you get involved in this matter. Yi Shiwen replied indifferently. Fairy Tian Miao's smile froze, and then she smiled like a flower. So, you know everything. I thought I was hiding well, but you're warning me. Are you worried about me? Don't flatter yourself. The more you know about some things, the faster you will die. Even if you have the backing of the 9 Nether Holy Cult, some people can easily kill you. Yi Shiwen's tone was dull. It was a matter of course for him. The 9 Nether Cult is nothing? Fairy Tian Miao's smile didn't diminish. There aren't many people who would dare to say that. I don't believe that your enemy is stronger than those old monsters of my family. Even the heavenly masters have to give face to our headmaster. Yi Shiwen stopped and glanced at Fairy Tian Miao. That person is a monster, a madman. You will die if you run into him, and not even your bones will be left. So, I advise you to stay far away from him. When Yi Shiwen talked about being eaten, he didn't mean being eaten to death in the ordinary people's understanding. Instead, he meant that he would be swallowed alive. He believed that Emperor Primordial Chaos would do anything in order to survive. He even dared to eat an emperor monarch, let alone a mere quasi-emperor. Okay, I know. Even if I have this monster, it won't work. Fairy Tian Miao's expression froze. She could feel that Yi Shiwen wasn't joking, but then she smiled again, as if there was nothing in this world that could make her smile disappear. But I still feel that you are worried about me. Am I wrong? Ha! Yi Shiwen chuckled and sped up his pace. The two seemed to be carefree, but in fact, they were moving very fast. In just a moment, they had already left the direction of the bazaar. Hey! Yi Shiwen used a bit of his martial power, and the two were instantly pulled apart. Fairy Tian Miao was pulled hundreds of miles away in an instant. She angrily stamped her small boots and raised her martial power to the limit as if she was in a fit of pique. Her figure streaked across the sky like a fairy. It was extremely graceful, but also extremely fast. This was the supreme agility technique of the 9 Nether Cult. After a long time, she saw Yi Shiwen in the distance and quickly chased after him. Hey, is it really okay for you to say, haha, to a little girl like this? She had seen people gnashing their teeth at her in her life, and had also seen people admiring her, but she had never seen someone completely disregard her like this. It wasn't that they were playing hard to get, but they genuinely didn't put her in their eyes at all. No one knew. Even she herself did not realize that unknowingly, she had also developed a bit of competitive spirit. Yi Xuan turned around and saw that Fairy Tian Miao had stubbornly chased after him. He couldn't help but feel angry and amused at the same time, and said, "You're very persistent, but you're not a little girl. If all the little girls in the world were peak quasi-emperors, then all the men in the world wouldn't be able to survive. Why don't you slow down a bit and wait for me?" Fairy Tian Miao's charming eyes flashed as she looked at Yi Xuan. She looked extremely delicate as she said, "Put away your charm technique. This level of charm technique is useless against me." Yi Xuan indifferently said, "Don't blame me for being ruthless and ruthless if you use it again." Yi Xuan had the enlightening mind ancient tree on his body, and his martial power was tyrannical and outstanding. So, this charm technique was nothing to him. It couldn't affect him even a little bit. Fairy Tian Miao could feel that Yi Xuan wasn't joking. The current Yi Xuan was like the supreme elders of her sect who had become emperors. They couldn't be violated. They were the supreme existences of the world. They controlled the world and could educate the people. They couldn't be blasphemed against by others. I know. Fairy Tian Miao stuck out her tongue and quickly put away her charm technique. She wasn't convinced, but she wasn't a fool. She didn't feel any killing intention from Yi Xuan's body. However, Yi Xuan had killed a quasi-emperor without any killing intention on his body. People would have killing intention towards other people. However, who had ever heard of people having killing intention towards ants? They were just ants that could be trampled to death at any time. How could they have killing intention towards them? Do you really want to throw me off so heartlessly? Fairy Tian Miao said, "There's no friendship between us." Yi Xuan stopped and looked at Fairy Tian Miao with an indifferent expression and said, "You'll regret it if you chase after me again. Even a disciple of the 9 Nether Holy Cult can't save you. What if I insist on chasing after you?" Fairy Tian Miao suddenly said. She was bursting with curiosity towards such a mysterious man. She had never felt this way before. She had never had the impulse to understand a person like this. "Then come with me. It just so happens that I'm short of a maidservant. You're barely qualified to be one," Yi Xuan suddenly said. Just as he was about to say those words, he suddenly changed his mind. He knew too little about the Fortune God dynasty, but if he had someone who had a deep understanding of the Fortune God dynasty and the fortune world by his side, it would undoubtedly save him a lot of trouble. Fairy Tian Miao inexplicably heaved a sigh of relief, as if she had been freed from hell. However, she immediately became angry. She was the current saintess of the 9 Nether Holy Cult. Her status was high enough to be on an equal footing with the sect masters of some small sections. In fact, she was even nobler than them. This person actually dared to ask her to be a maidservant and barely qualified to be one. It was simply a humiliation. What if I say no? Fairy Tian Miao suddenly felt a little regretful. Wasn't her curiosity too strong? That's not up to you. Chapter 30:21. Do you think you can catch me if I want to escape? Fairy Tian Miao felt that the man in front of her was indeed powerful. But no matter how powerful he was, he could only be a quasi-emperor. This was also one of the rules of the Celestial Pole Island. It was impossible for an emperor to enter. No matter how powerful he was, couldn't he just escape? But what she didn't know was that Yi Xuan was able to enter because he was seriously injured. Most of his martial power was used to suppress his injuries, so the martial power he could display was far less than 1/10,000th of his peak strength. This was why he could fall into the barrier. Otherwise, a terrible collision would have broken out with the barrier, and the world would have been destroyed. But even so, Yi Xuan could easily crush all quasi-emperors with his sovereign emperor body. Unless a monster who was comparable to Yi Xuan appeared, there was a possibility that he could barely compete with him. But wasn't Yi Xuan the only one in the universe who had such a character in countless years? Fairy Tian Miao immediately turned around and turned into a sky full of figures. She was like a fairy from the 9th heaven who had descended to the world. In a flash, she had already flown tens of thousands of miles away. Her speed had also soared to the extreme. "Come back!" Yi Shiwen shouted softly, and a big hand suddenly grabbed out. Fairy Tian Miao was already tens of thousands of miles away, but she only felt her vision go black. Then, she unexpectedly appeared in front of Yi Shiwen again. When she saw the indifferent expression on Yi Shiwen's face, Fairy Tian Miao could no longer maintain her smiling expression. It was as if she had seen a ghost. "I don't believe it." Fairy Tian Miao's figure flashed again tens of thousands of miles away, but this time, she flew in a completely different direction. "Come back!" Following Yi Shiwen's shout, Fairy Tian Miao, who had just flown away, felt her vision go black. Then, she was caught again. This almost caused her to break down. How could this be? She didn't even have the strength to resist. Her vision went black, and she was captured. If the first time could be a coincidence, then the second time could not be a coincidence at all. It could only mean that the strength of the green-robed man in front of her was astonishing. His strength was completely above hers. Otherwise, there was no way to explain why she couldn't escape. Since she had already made this judgment, she stopped struggling because no matter how much she struggled, it was useless. "All right, I admit defeat." Fairy Tian Miao suddenly felt that Yi Shiwen was right. Curiosity was the root of all dangers. She wouldn't have ended up like this if she hadn't suddenly become curious. The dignified Fairy Tian Miao had become someone else's maid. Just thinking about it made her feel crazy. "But you can't ask me to make some strange expressions, or else I'd rather die than be humiliated." Fairy Tian Miao stared at Yi Shiwen with a pair of big watery eyes and said. She didn't dare to use her charm technique on Yi Shiwen at this time. However, she was born with a bewitching physique. "What are you thinking about?" Yi Shiwen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Besides, do you think you can resist if I really want to do something? You would rather die than be humiliated? If I really wanted to do something to you, you wouldn't even have the chance to die. Fairy Tian Miao thought for a moment and realized that this was indeed the case. This man's strength was truly unfathomable. Perhaps he would really become like that, and she wouldn't even be able to resist. Well, I'll take the initiative in that case. Anyway, I won't be able to escape this step. Fairy Tian Miao said, and began to undress her clothes. She then looked at Yi Shiwen while doing so. Her clothes were as light as a feather and fell to the ground without a sound. After a while, only her undergarments were left. She finally couldn't bear it anymore. She stared at Yi Shiwen and said, "Why didn't you come and stop me?" Yi Shiwen sneered and said, "Do you really think I can't see through your little tricks? You'd better put away your little tricks in the future. Otherwise, you'll regret it later." Fairy Tian Miao was a weird person. Ordinary people couldn't tell which of her words was true and which was false. Fairy Tian Miao felt as if she had been granted amnesty. Her clothes flashed, and she quickly put them back on. Then, she glanced at Yi Shiwen and muttered to herself, "This is the first time I've met such an unromantic man. Is he really a blockhead? Or does he have a heart of stone?" However, she hadn't finished muttering when she felt a slap on her forehead. She immediately cried out in alarm. "It hurts!" This time, she wasn't faking it, it was real. Her xianqi had been cultivated for a long time. Although her body looked like a jade, in fact, it was already invulnerable. But even so, she was still hurt by the slap, leaving a bloody red palm mark on her forehead. "I won't teach you a lesson if you criticize me again." Yi Shiwen's voice gradually drifted away. "Hurry up and catch up." Fairy Tian Miao could only rub her forehead and quickly catch up with him. "You're lucky. I would have killed you if I hadn't wanted to understand something," Yi Shiwen indifferently said. Fairy Tian Miao stuck out her tongue when she heard this. Yi Shiwen spoke as if he was killing a chicken or a dog. Although she felt depressed, she didn't dare to criticize him. She would inevitably be taught a lesson if he saw through her. Then, how should I address you in the future? Fairy Tian Miao could only accept her bad luck. She couldn't do anything about it. After all, she had bumped into him. "You can call me Your Honor from now on. My real name is Yi Shiwen. You can use my name if you need anything in the future," Yi Shiwen said. Fairy Tian Miao was a mischievous person. It had been a long time since someone had dared to play tricks in front of him. This made him feel as if he had changed a little. Fairy Tian Miao curled her lips. Wouldn't it be better for her to use her sex name if she needed something? The holy cult's name was much more deterrent than Yi Xuan's name. However, she suddenly recalled something. Yi Xuan, why does this name sound so strange? She doesn't seem to have such a character among the powerful quasi-emperors that she knows. One must know that the holy cult's status and ability were very high. She didn't know any outstanding quasi-emperors in the present world. Even if there were, they should be as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. However, she had encountered one today. Your Honor, why haven't I seen your name on the Emperor's substitute list? Or is it just a fake name? Fairy Tian Miao thought that it would be very difficult for her to say the words Your Honor. However, she seemed to be infected by Yi Xuan's temperament. She seemed to be able to say the words Your Honor as if it was a matter of course. He had an aura that could make people submit to him. It made her feel as if she was facing the supreme elders of the cult. Do I need to use a fake name? The Emperor's substitute list? Yi Xuan's mouth slightly curved into a smile. Yes, the Emperor's substitute list. Don't look at how you grab me like a little chick. In fact, I can also be in the top 10 of the Emperor's substitute list. Fairy Tian Miao finally found a little sense of self-confidence. Yes, I'm not a good-for-nothing. I'm one of the top 10 geniuses in the Emperor's substitute list. Fairy Tian Miao's name is very popular no matter where she goes. But she has suffered defeat in front of Yi Xuan. However, she looked at Yi Xuan again. It seemed that even the existence who was ranked first on the Emperor's substitute list was not his opponent. Although she knew that there was a gap between her and that freak who was ranked first on the monarch substitute list, it was only a gap. Even that freak couldn't carry her around like a little chick. It was simply a blow to her self-esteem. It made her, who was in the top 10 of the Emperor's substitute list, feel no sense of existence. It was a slap to her face. The Emperor's substitute list? It's really meaningless. Becoming an emperor doesn't depend on the ranking on the list. If you succeed, you can succeed even if you're not on the list. If you don't succeed, it's useless even if you're on the list. Yi Xuan said. He didn't care about this kind of list. It could be used to measure combat strength. Some people might really have to wait for the Emperor's substitute list for a lifetime. There was no shortage of amazing existences in the 10,000 worlds of the heavens. For example, the strength of the tree god was above that of Fairy Tian Miao. However, it had been defeated in the end. In fact, not even its seed would have been left if Yi Xuan hadn't rescued it. Therefore, the so-called Emperor's substitute list was useless in Yi Xuan's eyes. The Emperor realm was like this. If you could cross it, then you could cross it. If you couldn't, then it was useless no matter how hard you tried. You speak as if you really understand it. Fairy Tian Miao said in a somewhat unconvinced manner. However, she recalled that the Supreme Headmaster had once made a similar evaluation. However, she hadn't listened to it. It seemed that everyone in the myriad heavens recognized this list. Many people also felt proud to be on this list. Moreover, you're actually not the first? Yi Xuan glanced at Fairy Tian Miao and said. There seemed to be some disdain in his expression. Hey, it's easy for you to say that. Do you think it's so easy to get the first place? Do you know the origin of the guy in the first place? It's said that he's the reincarnation of a heavenly lord. He's more than 10,000 years younger than me. However, his cultivation has already crushed mine. Fairy Tian Miao said immediately. Even someone as arrogant as her was sincerely convinced by the legendary first place. So what if he's the reincarnation of a heavenly lord? If one's origin can decide everything in this world, then what's the point of cultivation? I'm not the reincarnation of a heavenly lord. I don't have a heaven-shaking bloodline either. However, I'm the first. Yi Xuan said, as if it was a matter of course. First place? Why haven't I heard of it? Which mountain is the first place? Fairy Tian Miao also felt very strange. It was reasonable to say that such a person wouldn't be on the Emperor's substitute list even if he wasn't on the 9 nether cults' intelligence. After all, the Emperor's substitute list was a supreme treasure. It automatically sensed the heavenly way and arranged the rankings. Perhaps he was an old monster who had been sleeping for countless years and had just awakened. Chapter 30:22. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that it was possible. After all, this wasn't the first time that the celestial pole island had appeared. Perhaps there was an old monster from a certain era who was stranded here and couldn't leave. Moreover, Yi Shiwen didn't look like he was boasting. Instead, he looked like he was taking it for granted. His demeanor made people believe that he wasn't bragging. Since it wasn't the current era, then it could only be the strongest person from a long time ago. Such a situation wasn't uncommon in the Fortune God dynasty. The Fortune God dynasty's history was too long, and it had produced many amazing characters. It was impossible to count them all. From time to time, a super ancient genius who had been in seclusion for countless years would come out and compete with the peak characters of the present era. Such a situation wasn't uncommon. Therefore, Fairy Tian Miao immediately categorized Yi Shiwen as an old monster from countless years ago. Only in this way could these unreasonable things be explained. Although they were all peak quasi-emperors, those old monsters were too ferocious and had accumulated incomparably deep skills. In the present era, there were only one or two people who could compete with these old monsters. Although Fairy Tian Miao considered herself to be good, it was unrealistic to think that she could compete with them when her cultivation time was less than a fraction of their age. After all, those old monsters who had shaken the world many years ago were all super geniuses. Which one of them didn't have outstanding talent? Coupled with the accumulation of countless years, they were truly terrifying to the extreme. Even escaping from the hands of an enraged emperor wasn't a rare case. They were simply ridiculously strong. Thinking of this, Fairy Tian Miao felt balanced. It wasn't that she was weak, it was just that she had lived a few years less than these old monsters. Yi Shiwen looked at Fairy Tian Miao. He didn't know what to say because he had come from the Myriad Heavens world. Although the Fortune God dynasty was stronger than the Myriad Heavens world, he didn't think that the Fortune God dynasty was stronger than the Myriad Heavens world. Those peerless talents who had reached peak quasi-emperor wouldn't be inferior even in the Fortune God dynasty. It was just that they might not have the opportunity to come to the Fortune world. That path was simply too dangerous. Even he had almost died there. He had confirmed that the Lord of Heaven and Yi Mo's former master, the Demon King, had died on that path. Empyrean Lord Primordius had been imprisoned in there for an unknown period of time, and it was unknown how many people he had killed. What's so strange about the first place? Don't tell me you've seen everyone? Yi Shiwen said indifferently. That's not it, but it's not like I haven't heard of it. Fairy Tian Miao cautiously glanced at Yi Shiwen and said, He's the champion after all. Soon, the two of them stopped in front of the healing place that Yi Shiwen had opened up earlier. He had opened up a small world with the barrier. Fairy Tian Miao entered the small world and was shocked. To be able to casually open up such a small world, his comprehension of world laws had reached an unimaginable level. If it were her, it would be impossible. She would not be able to condense even 1% of this world. In fact, as far as she knew, even the sect master did not seem to have the ability to create a complete small world. Perhaps only the legendary heavenly venerables could do it. This was because it took too much time and energy to create a pocket world. Generally, when an emperor created a pocket world, it would at most be a half-bit wall, similar to a divine kingdom's own world. It would be equipped with certain maxims, but in fact, it would not be equipped with most maxims. This kind of pocket world was especially dependent on the existence of the spellcaster. Once the spellcaster died, it would cause the entire pocket world to collapse. Therefore, it was impossible to take care of everything. Even the Emperor Lord might not be able to do it. However, Yi Shiwen was able to do it. However, she immediately rejected this idea. This was certainly not done by Yi Shiwen. She didn't know where he had obtained the fragment of the microcosm, but he had opened it up. This was the most likely scenario. But she did not know that he could do what ordinary Emperor Lords couldn't. Previously, he had opened up a martial Emperor Heaven by relying on the world laws contained in the seed of the world tree. Now he was only opening up a small world. Compared to the opening of the martial Emperor Heaven, the workload was not the same. He could complete it at any time. This was also the place where he stayed while recuperating. Although he was not afraid, he had to be careful in this state. Yi Shiwen sat cross-legged on the cloud bed in the small world and said to Fairy Tian Miao, "You will stay here for the next period of time. I have something to tell you." Fairy Tian Miao saw that she had no choice, so she stopped struggling and asked, "May I know what your honor wants me to do?" She had obviously given up on herself. The man in front of her was unfathomable. It would not do her any good to fight him head-on. "It's just a small matter. I won't tie you to my side forever. Before I leave the island, there are some things I need your help with. There are also some things I need to consult you about." Yi Shiwen said. He did not care about Fairy Tian Miao's reluctance. With his status and strength, as long as he made a call, he could get as many followers as he wanted. Even those old monsters who had been asleep for God knows how many years would want to follow him. Followers were different from ordinary subordinates. They were very close people. Once they became a follower, they could not betray their master. Otherwise, they would be spurned by countless people and be hunted down by their master. Fairy Tian Miao breathed a sigh of relief after hearing Yi Shiwen's words. "What is the situation in the Fortune God dynasty?" Yi Shiwen asked. He had only thought about it for a moment, but he had already thought of many things. Fairy Tian Miao's level and grade were far higher than Fairy Jiangju's. Her words were far more detailed than Fairy Tian Miao's. The Fortune God dynasty was far more powerful than Yi Shiwen had expected. There were many sects established by the emperor, but the most tyrannical among them was naturally the Fortune God dynasty's government. Countless years ago, the Fortune God dynasty's ancestor, Fortune God Heavenly Venerate, established the current Fortune God dynasty and established the 4 Heavenly Venerates territories around the Fortune God dynasty. Under the rule of every Heavenly Venerable, there were numerous masters, like a school of carps in the river. However, under the Fortune God dynasty's suppression of the Fortune world, the Fortune world was not calm and tranquil. On the contrary, in the outer regions where the Fortune God dynasty's forces had yet to penetrate, there were many unimaginably tyrannical existences. Even Heavenly Venerables felt that these existences were difficult to deal with. Moreover, there were many other divergent existences in the outer domain. They were opponents that the Fortune God dynasty could not defeat. Therefore, although the Fortune God dynasty's interior was considered peaceful, in fact, the Fortune God dynasty's 4 Heavenly Venerates were constantly at war with the outer domain. For countless years, both sides had suffered innumerable casualties. Inside the Fortune God dynasty, there were many big sects that divided the Fortune God dynasty's authority, especially the Heavenly Tao cult, which was a tyrannical behemoth. How many masters had they nurtured in recent years? Even the Fortune God dynasty's officials were unable to infiltrate the lands under the Heavenly Tao cult's rule. In this aspect, Holy Church of Abysmal was not much different. They were both considered feudal lords. Under the rule of these large sects, there were many smaller sects established by emperors. Under the Fortune God dynasty's rule, these sects were small feudal vassals. Of course, the biggest force was the Fortune God dynasty. There were also many emperors who chose to side with the Fortune God dynasty. Yi Shiwen immediately understood a lot after Fairy Tian Miao explained. In other words, the current Fortune world was divided into the Fortune God dynasty and the outer domain. In the Fortune God dynasty, there were many large sects in the Fortune God dynasty. The Heavenly Tao sect and the 9 Nether Sacred Cult were the leaders of these large sections. Although they usually fought with each other, they were surprisingly united when facing the Fortune God dynasty. That's how it was. Yi Shiwen nodded lightly. He seemed to have understood a lot of problems. No wonder that Heavenly Tao disciple was so domineering. Now you know. Now you're afraid. Fairy Tian Miao looked at Yi Shiwen and thought proudly. She hated Yi Shiwen for capturing her. Therefore, she had exaggerated the terror of the Heavenly Tao sect and the 9 Nether Sacred Cult. But for her, this wasn't an exaggeration. In her opinion, it was more or less the same. So what? What's there to be afraid of? Yi Shiwen said indifferently. He quickly digested the information in Fairy Tian Miao's words. As for the part where Fairy Tian Miao had exaggerated, he didn't believe it at all. Fairy Tian Miao was cunning, but it wouldn't be easy to deceive him. You dared to ruin the heavenly Tao sect's plan. Do you think that they will let you off? Fairy Tian Miao smiled and said, if the heavenly Tao sect wants to cause trouble for you, then you can only hide in the Celestial Pole Island forever. Once the Celestial Pole Island reopens, both the heavenly Tao sect and the 9 Nether Sacred Cult will be met by the Emperors. No matter how strong you are, you won't be able to contend against the Emperors. When the time comes, you won't even have a chance to escape from the wrath of the heavenly Tao sect's Emperor. Then I'll kill them all? But what are you trying to say? Yi Shiwen asked. Fairy Tian Miao almost choked when she heard Yi Shiwen's words. You want to kill them all? That's an Emperor, not some random person on the street. What I want to say is, are you interested in joining the 9 Nether Sacred Cult? Chapter 30:23. What I want to say is, are you interested in joining our holy cult? Fairy Tian Miao looked at Yi Shiwen's small face and said in a serious manner, join your holy cult? Yi Shiwen looked at Fairy Tian Miao and said indifferently, that's right. You've already offended the Heavenly Law sect. The people of the Heavenly Law sect will definitely seek revenge for the smallest grievance. They won't let you off. However, things will be different if you join my holy church. Would the holy church dare to start a war with my holy church just for the disciple of a quasi-emperor? Fairy Tian Miao looked at Yi Shiwen and said with a complacent expression, I believe that the supreme elders of my sect will definitely welcome an expert like you. Fairy Tian Miao looked at Yi Shiwen with an expectant look on her face. She was a native of the Fortune God dynasty. So, how could she not understand that only the Emperor realm experts had a place in the Fortune God dynasty? They could be considered as the true rulers of a region. However, these peak-level quasi-emperors were also highly valued by the major sections. After all, it was impossible for an Emperor realm expert to appear out of thin air. These peak-level quasi-emperors must have crossed the heavenly tribulation. Moreover, the combat strength of these peak quasi-emperors was not ordinary and could be said to be a very important supplement. In particular, this guy's combat strength was ridiculously tyrannical. Perhaps even the number 1 Emperor on the Emperor's substitute list was no match for him. This kind of person was definitely worth roping in. Even if they had to confront the heavenly cult because of this, they would at most compensate the heavenly cult for some losses. As she had said before, she also did not believe that the heavenly cult would go to war with the holy cult for a dead quasi-emperor. This was her greatest source of confidence. Moreover, in her opinion, Yi Shiwen must have nowhere to go after offending the heavenly cult unless he also had an incomparably powerful major sect behind him. Otherwise, joining the holy cult was inevitable. If he agreed, then he would be too embarrassed to continue to restrain her. Thinking about it, she felt a little proud of her wit. Not only had she resolved the current crisis, but she had also won over a great expert for the cult. Not interested? Yi Shiwen shook his head and said, it was absolutely impossible for a person like him to join these great sections. An ordinary quasi-emperor might be able to do so, but an emperor like him, who had already walked his own path, joining a great sect might be a kind of restriction. Moreover, although what Fairy Tian Miao said was a threat, it was only a threat. What was there to be afraid of once his injuries were healed? Moreover, although what Fairy Tian Miao said was a threat, it was only a threat. The flower-like smile on Fairy Tian Miao's face suddenly froze. She still couldn't believe that Yi Shiwen had refused her invitation. Don't tell me that you don't know what kind of existence White Taoism is? Those people boast that they are the leaders of the world's great Daos, and absolutely do not allow the slightest bit of disobedience. Even towards the Fortune Divine Dynasty, they will not listen to their orders. If you offend them, other than our 9 Nether Holy Cult, no one can save you. Yi Shiwen looked at her shocked expression, and couldn't help but find it funny, and said, since I said so, I naturally have confidence in myself. No matter how tyrannical they are, they can't do anything to me. You can think that I'm talking big, but regarding the invitation, you don't have to say it again. What is your relationship with Qin Wugo? Why is the heavenly cult chasing after him? Yi Shiwen asked. Seeing Yi Shiwen's resolute expression, Fairy Tian Miao dispelled the idea of inviting him. In any case, in her eyes, This guy must be an old monster who had been isolated from the world for countless years. Therefore, he didn't know the terror of the heavenly cult. It doesn't matter. When he leaves the island, he will know how terrifying the heavenly cult's pursuit is. At that time, will I be afraid that he won't join the embrace of the holy cult? Fairy Tian Miao immediately gave up the idea of persuading Yi Shiwen and said, Qin Wugo is my good sister. We have a very good relationship since childhood. As for why she is being chased by the heavenly cult, it is because of her father. Her father had a huge conflict with the heavenly cult in the past. Since then, the father and daughter have become a thorn in the side of the heavenly cult. Now that the celestial pole island is open, the little cow knows of the heavenly cult naturally won't let her go easily. The heavenly cult has the heavenly cult's heavenly cult. Don't tell me that your holy cult doesn't have a holy union? Yi Shiwen asked. This time, the place where the celestial pole island appeared is under the rule of the Eastern Lord. So, it is closer to the heavenly cult, and our holy cult is under the rule of the Western Lord. So, we are too far away. So, we don't have enough time. Even if we activate the interdomain transmission matrix, we won't be able to send many people over in a short time. Therefore, I, who happen to be traveling nearby, came here on behalf of the holy cult. Fairy Tian Miao replied. Yi Shiwen suddenly understood. So, that's how it is. No wonder. He had been wondering why there seemed to be a big disparity between them. However, this also gave him a piece of information. The appearance of the celestial pole island was completely uncertain. It could appear anywhere. Moreover, it would close for an extreme period of time, and it would reopen after 100 years. Basically, wherever it appeared, the forces of that area would be able to obtain relatively more benefits. So, that's how it is. I understand. All right, I'm going to heal my injuries, Yi Shiwen said, and closed his eyes to heal his injuries. Although he didn't have any healing pellets, his healing speed was very slow. But at this time, he could recover a little bit. The danger of the Fortune God dynasty was far greater than that of the myriad worlds. She saw that Yi Shiwen didn't pay attention to her at all. He was completely ignoring her. Moreover, he looked down on her battle prowess. He wasn't afraid that she would attack him while he was healing. This was blatant disdain. Fairy Tian Miao glared at Yi Shiwen fiercely. She gnashed her teeth and puffed up her cheeks as if she was angry with Yi Shiwen. After a long time, she saw that Yi Shiwen didn't respond. No matter what expression she made, Yi Shiwen didn't respond. She felt bored. This was the first time she had encountered such a situation. In the end, she could only sit cross-legged and watch Yi Shiwen heal his injuries. Yi Shiwen's healing technique seemed to be completely different from any cultivation technique she knew. She was already a peak quasi-emperor, so she still had this kind of insight. It was just that she didn't know what kind of cultivation technique he was using. It felt a bit like the cultivation technique that her good sister, Qin Wugo, cultivated. This further strengthened her judgment. He was indeed an old monster who had been in closed-door cultivation for countless years. Otherwise, how could he have a cultivation system that even she couldn't recognize? Although the various sex inheritances were different, in general, their cultivation systems were close to the same. Only Yi Shiwen's was completely different. Suddenly, Yi Shiwen opened his mouth and said, "If you feel bored, you might as well practice." Fairy Tian Miao was startled and quickly closed her eyes. After a long time, she opened her eyes again. When she saw that Yi Shiwen's expression was unchanged, she almost thought that she had misheard him. But at this time, she didn't want to challenge Yi Shiwen's methods, so she quickly closed her eyes. While both of them were immersed in cultivation, half a year's time passed in a blink of an eye. They didn't even realize that half a year had passed. Yi Shiwen opened his eyes. His injuries had only gotten a little better in more than half a year's time. Sure enough, the injury caused by that spear was too powerful. Even with his cultivation, he couldn't heal it. He could only forcibly suppress it. However, the appointed time with Star Merchant had finally arrived. The moment Yi Shiwen opened his eyes, Fairy Tian Miao also opened her eyes. Of course, it was impossible for her cultivation to make great progress in more than half a year's cultivation. However, she did feel that her cultivation had improved. Her progress was more than 10 times faster than usual. She keenly felt that this was because the aura that Yi Shiwen was exuding seemed to have tamed the world's laws. Here, the world's laws were very obedient, so she could easily comprehend them. Moreover, comprehending the world's laws wasn't a dangerous thing. She didn't need to worry about falling into it and becoming a part of the world. For a peak quasi-emperor like him, the probability of transforming into Tao was much higher than the probability of being struck to death by the heaven's tribulation. Well, let's go and find Star Merchant. Yi Shiwen got up from the cloud bed and said, "However, I'm afraid that we'll fall into that cow-nosed brat's trap if we go like this." Half a year's time has passed. That cow-nosed brat must have already received the news. He must have set up an inescapable net waiting for us. Fairy Tian Miao couldn't help but say with some worry. She was confident that she could compete with that cow-nosed brat. However, that was only if he was alone. However, that cow-nosed brat had organized the Heavenly Law Union. There were many experts in the union. Otherwise, she wouldn't have gone to the Heavenly Law Union to seek justice for her little sister. She would have gone straight to the Heavenly Law Union to find trouble with that cow-nosed brat. The reason why she hadn't done so was because she had some misgivings. Inescapable net? What kind of inescapable net can a group of quasi-emperors arrange? Don't worry, just follow me. I'll kill anyone who dares to stop me, Yi Shiwen said in a very natural manner. His words revealed a kind of peerless elegance that looked down upon the world. This kind of invincible self-confidence even infected Fairy Tian Miao. Fairy Tian Miao recovered after a long time. Then, she muttered, "What kind of inescapable net can a group of quasi-emperors arrange? You're talking as if you're not a quasi-emperor." However, Fairy Tian Miao's voice hadn't yet faded when she hurriedly moved to catch up with Yi Shiwen. Chapter 3024. However, the only thing he didn't expect was that Yi Shiwen wasn't worried at all. In fact, he didn't even try to sneak around. Instead, he just casually came to the appointment. Was he too careless? Or was he really that bold? However, he immediately felt that something was wrong. What kind of person was Yi Shiwen? He was a terrifying existence that was ranked in the top 10 of the Emperor's substitute list. She disdained all men in the world. She had once said that her future husband must be an Emperor realm expert. She didn't even care about quasi-emperors. At this time, she recalled the humiliating memory of being grabbed by Yi Shiwen like a little chick. She, the dignified Fairy Tian Miao, couldn't even withstand a single blow. After entering the market, the two of them received even more gazes. However, Fairy Tian Miao was still able to sense the white-robed young noble's gaze. Moreover, the white-robed young noble didn't even try to conceal his gaze. To him, this wasn't anything. "I've brought them, but you..." Star Merchant couldn't help but look at Yi Shiwen worriedly. Young master is right. However, this old servant believes that such a person is worth roping in if he doesn't come from a great sect. Young master is now competing with Baidaozi. In a situation where there is almost no difference in strength, whoever has a stronger follower will be stronger. This can also be considered as a victory. "What do you think, young master?" the old servant slowly said. Although that little cow's nose was powerful, he might not be a match for him. Perhaps having more people was an advantage, if that was even an advantage. The arrival of the two immediately alarmed the entire market. That's right. Let's continue watching. If he can escape from the hands of Baidaozi, then this young master will go and accept him as a follower, the white-clothed young master said. His gaze fell on Fairy Tian Miao, who was next to Yi Shiwen. A fiery expression flashed in his eyes. It seemed as if a group of flames was burning in them. Is this person really so extraordinary? Even Fairy Tian Miao, who is said to not marry anyone other than an emperor, is willing to become his follower. The Heavenly Tao Union didn't intend to conceal it. If Yi Shiwen appeared, then they would kill him to restore their reputation. If Yi Shiwen didn't appear, then it would be even better. Who would dare to doubt the prestige and strength of the Heavenly Tao Union? Young master is wise. In her heart, she even had a little bit of expectation. Perhaps that little cow would be able to teach this arrogant fellow a harsh lesson. However, She immediately discarded this thought. This was obviously impossible. Who knew which ravine this fellow in front of her was an old monster from countless years ago? It was precisely because of this that people felt that he wasn't simple, and they couldn't see through him at a glance. However, he was a very strange person. At times, he seemed to have an outstanding temperament that was attractive but not hurtful. At other times, he seemed to have no sense of existence at all. If one was not careful, they would easily overlook him. Yi Shiwen had already sensed that young Master Tian Ming was looking at Fairy Tian Miao with a possessive look in his eyes. However, he was a bit surprised to see that young Master Tian Ming wasn't hostile towards him in such a situation. Was it because he wanted to recruit him? Or was it because he thought that Yi Shiwen wasn't worth mentioning? He wasn't on the same level as Fairy Tian Miao. So, he didn't need to be vigilant? Looks like it's him. He looks rather strange, but I can't see anything special about him. Is this the man who had killed the experts of the Heavenly Dao Union? Someone looked at Yi Shiwen in confusion. Who is he? He's a bit interesting. Yi Shiwen glanced at the white-clothed young master and felt a bit amused. Suddenly, a commotion was heard from outside. However, it doesn't matter. We'll know his background once we get out of the island. Moreover, whether he can escape from the hands of Baidaozi or not is still a problem. Heavenly Dao Union. Humph, they aren't a sect that will swallow the provocation of others. The white-clothed young master said with a smile. Yes, they felt that Yi Shiwen was as gentle as a jade. They could sense him from afar, but he didn't seem overbearing or fierce. He wasn't as dazzling as those famous peak quasi-emperors. Is this the guy who calls himself Yi Shiwen? A white-clothed, elegant man was waving a fan above a restaurant in the bazaar. He looked at the two people walking into the bazaar with a smile on his face. Yi Shiwen didn't care about what these onlookers were thinking. He went straight into the bazaar and began to search for Star Merchant. There was nothing more important for him than healing his injuries. Anyone who dared to stand in his way at this time would die. It's him. Tian Miao Fairy's face revealed a bit of annoyance. It seemed that she had been pestered for a long time. Some people also expressed their dissatisfaction. They firmly believed that Yi Shiwen must have some special characteristics that they hadn't understood yet. Otherwise, how could things have turned out this way? Yi Shiwen had roughly guessed young Master Tian Ming's thoughts in a short moment. Such a proud person had that kind of self-confidence in his bones. Star Merchant had a look of disbelief on his face. This young master has dared to appear at this time. He thought that Yi Shiwen would hide far away if he knew that the Heavenly Law Union had set up an inescapable net to deal with him. Who would come here knowing that there was an inescapable net here? This doesn't make sense. The old servant's expression was indifferent, as he felt that it was a matter of course. For giants like them that had existed since the founding of the Fortune Divine Dynasty, they had collected all kinds of information. If it was really an old monster that had appeared in the past, even if he hadn't shown his face for several million years, or even tens of millions of years, it was impossible for him to escape their intelligence network. Have you brought the goods that I asked for? Yi Shiwen asked. Yi Shiwen's aura was very faint. He seemed like an ordinary person. He didn't seem like a powerhouse, no matter how they perceived him. If not for the fact that many people had sworn that they had seen it with their own eyes, and that the knight and the vicious beast's corpse couldn't be faked, they wouldn't have believed that this seemingly gentle young man could be so terrifying. It's true. This old servant has already asked the disciples of the Heavenly Mystery Pavilion. They have encountered him before, so it should be true. However, we don't know whether this Yi Shiwen's real name or a fake one. The old servant slowly said. His voice was hoarse. It sounded as if a piece of cloth was being torn apart. He thought that Yi Shiwen would hide this time, and then secretly contact him to purchase medicinal herbs. He didn't care about this matter. As for the anger of the Heavenly Law Union, he didn't believe that the Heavenly Law Union would dare to fall out with the Heavenly Business Union because of this matter. There was no need for that. Reporting to the senior, this person is the young Master Tian Ming of the Heaven's Mandate cult. There was a look of disgust in Fairy Tian Miao's eyes. All the representatives of the Heaven's Mandate cult are called young Master Tian Ming. He is the young Master Tian Ming of this generation. Yi Shiwen arrived at the bazaar. He didn't know when the bazaar had already been filled with people. It was obvious that they had been waiting here for some time. Yi Shiwen? I have never heard of this name. It should be a fake name, the white-clothed young master said indifferently. However, I don't have any impression of such a powerful person. It's a pity that we are on the celestial pole island. If we were in the cult, I would only need a moment to find out his background. An old servant followed behind him. He was in the depths of the endless shadows. His aura was unfathomable. Occasionally, he would reveal a bit of aura, which made the space feel as if it had been imprisoned. What's so special about him? Come and try to chop a quasi-emperor to death with your hand blade. That's a quasi-emperor, not a cabbage. However, young Master Tianming only asked him to take a look. Then, he found the figure of a star merchant in a corner of the bazaar. Everyone was shocked. However, Yi Shiwen had an indifferent look on his face, while Fairy Tian Miao was gnashing her teeth. Who wanted to be submissive? Who wanted to be his follower? Who wanted to be his follower? They had been forced to do so. This person obviously had a big background. Yi Shiwen had never concealed his identity. However, he had never wantonly spread the news. So, he had even heard his name in such a short time. It was indeed extraordinary. With his Fa Li, it was not difficult for him to build a restaurant on flat ground, even in such a desolate place. In fact, he had just condensed it using the laws. To someone like him, the thing he could not stand the most was vulgarity and brutality. He remembered the legend about Heaven's Mandate cult that he had heard before. It was a super sect. However, the people of this super sect believed that they were extraordinary. They believed that they were the chosen ones. Their martial arts cultivation was also related to this. So, they had absolute confidence in themselves. Both of their cultivations were extraordinarily powerful. Although they were quite far away from the bazaar, it didn't take long for them to reach the edge of the bazaar. The one beside him seems to be Fairy Tian Miao, right? Why is Fairy Tian Miao standing beside him? Why is she standing behind him? It feels like, how do I put it, she's submissive. The man said awkwardly. How could such a proud woman follow behind a man? How could she have a submissive look? Although it wasn't very obvious, everyone present could see it at a glance. Yi Shiwen heard this and looked up. He saw that the young master in white clothes saw the two of them looking up. He raised the wine glass in his hand and smiled slightly. So that's how it is. Yi Shiwen nodded. It was both. Chapter 3025. I've brought them, but you... Star Merchant couldn't help but look at Yi Shiwen worriedly. This was a super nouveau riche buyer. For such a buyer, Star Merchant didn't want to see him throw away his life. Thinking about it, his mind was in a mess. Why did Yi Shiwen kill the people of the Heavenly Law Alliance? If it was someone else, the Heavenly Business Alliance could still handle it. Soon, the people of the Heavenly Law Alliance will get the news and rush over. You should leave quickly. Star Merchant couldn't help but remind him. Yi Shiwen looked at Star Merchant and said, "They're just some jumping clowns. There's nothing to worry about. It's fine as long as you bring the goods." Just some jumping clowns? Star Merchant almost fainted when he heard this. In the whole world, the only person who dared to say that the people of the Heavenly Law Alliance were jumping clowns was probably this lord. But looking at his appearance, it didn't seem like he was pretending. Could it be that this lord really had a super background that ordinary people didn't know about? If that was the case, there was no need to fear the Heavenly Law Alliance. Bragging again? Fairy Tian Miao couldn't help but roll her eyes. Although she knew that this so-called lord was very powerful, listening to him, it seemed like he was bragging. What a group of quasi-emperors could set up an inescapable net, what the Heavenly Law Alliance was just jumping clowns, and so on. No matter how she looked at it, it was all nonsense. This boast was too big. That little cow's nose, White Daozi, was not so easy to deal with. Then, she looked at Yi Shiwen again, and secretly thought, how can someone brag so naturally? It's like it's a matter of course. Suddenly, while Fairy Tian Miao was still cursing in her heart, a noise came from outside the market, followed by a voice. Yi Shiwen is here? Come out and accept your death. An indifferent voice came from outside. Star Merchant's expression immediately changed because he could already tell that this voice belonged to the leader of the Heavenly Law Alliance, the proud son of the Heavenly Law Sect, Bai Daozi. Sure enough, because of the previous matter, Bai Daozi personally came. But then he thought it was normal. After all, Yi Shiwen had killed quasi-emperors in seconds. Such a character could not be overestimated. It was normal for Bai Daozi to personally come to solve the problem. He was just about to suggest Yi Shiwen to quickly escape, but he saw that Yi Shiwen had already turned around, leaving behind only a few words. "I'll be right back. Before I come back, I hope you can prepare everything." After Yi Shiwen finished speaking, he walked straight out of the market. Fairy Tian Miao followed behind him. Behind him was the little maid. She couldn't tell who was the winner anymore. Yi Shiwen walked out of the market, only to see a young man in a Taoist robe, holding a sword in his hand, looking at Yi Shiwen with an indifferent expression. All the laws around him were trembling like the surface of a lake, with his body as the center, spreading in all directions. Behind him were more than 100 figures, all of whom were quasi-emperor experts. Every single one of them was a super expert that was rarely seen. At this moment, they were all gathered in one place. The Heavenly Tao Alliance was just an alliance formed by the younger generation of Heavenly Tao, but it was already so powerful. One could imagine how tyrannical Heavenly Tao was. Of course, the Heavenly Tao Alliance didn't only have these few experts, but the skeleton was already here. Bai Daozi was a cautious person. He knew that even a lion had to go all out to catch a rabbit. When facing a legendary existence that could kill a quasi-emperor in seconds, it was not wrong to be cautious. Yi Shiwen wasn't nervous at all. He just walked forward step by step. Every step he took seemed to trample on everyone's heart. He looked very heroic. In the depths of his eyes, it seemed as if the world was being created and the universe was being born. It was extremely profound. Everyone couldn't help but be subdued by his temperament. It was completely different from the gentle and jade-like temperament they had seen before. Only now did everyone understand that perhaps he was finally serious. Facing someone like Bai Daozi, perhaps even he would be cautious. "Senior sister, it's really that Yi Shiwen." Among these onlookers, the people of the Heavenly Profound Pavilion were impressively among them. In the past 6 months, only Yi Shiwen had hidden like an outsider to heal his injuries. However, on the Celestial Pole Island, it could be said that the sky had already been turned upside down. It was like boiling water. It was not that no one dared to challenge the Heavenly Tao sect, but without exception, all of them had a powerful background that was not inferior to the Heavenly Tao sect. Under such circumstances, they dared to compete with them. However, who was this Yi Shiwen? Not only the Heavenly Taoism couldn't find Yi Shiwen's origin, but even the others couldn't figure out who Yi Shiwen was. Only Fairy Jiangzhu of the Heavenly Profound Pavilion had vaguely guessed that perhaps Yi Shiwen's origin was not small. However, he was not in the Fortune God dynasty, but in the outer domain. Moreover, young Master Tianming of the Heaven's Mandate sect had asked them to come, so they didn't dare to not come. Thus, they saw Yi Shiwen again. However, compared to the day when they saw Yi Shiwen seemed to be in a much better state. His injuries were also much better. Or could it be said that his injuries have been concealed? It's really him. He is indeed an extremely dangerous person. Fairy Jiangzhu suddenly shivered. Before this, someone in the Heavenly Profound Pavilion had actually suggested to kill Yi Shiwen while he was seriously injured and take away his treasures. Such a situation was not uncommon. However, her intuition told her that Yi Shiwen was terrifying. That indescribable feeling of danger made her not dare to have such thoughts. Now it seemed that she was right. At that time, Yi Shiwen looked unparalleled, but he was not difficult to talk to. He even let them take away the sky dew grass. However, if he had any evil thoughts, she guessed that the group of people she brought with her would all be annihilated. At that time, the Heavenly Profound Pavilion would not even be able to cry. As expected, should small forces seek to survive in the cracks? This was a terrifying existence that dared to challenge the Heavenly Tao sect. When Bai Daozi saw Yi Shiwen, he should have felt some danger. However, he did not take it to heart. No matter how strong the other party was, he was by Daozi. So what if the other party was strong? The only thing that made him frown was the woman beside Yi Shiwen, Fairy Tian Miao. Fairy Tian Miao's Nine Nether cult was not on good terms with the Heavenly Tao sect. Therefore, he had fought with Fairy Tian Miao many times. Basically, he had the upper hand. However, it was only a slight advantage. If they were to fight face-to-face, Fairy Tian Miao would be a great trouble. Including Yi Shiwen, whose strength was unknown, he suddenly felt that it was a little tricky. You are Yi Shiwen? He had never seen a drawing before. What made him feel strange was that he had obviously looked for those who had seen Yi Shiwen with their own eyes. He wanted them to draw a drawing based on their memories. In the past, such a method had worked time and time again. No one could escape from it. However, it just didn't work on Yi Shiwen. They clearly remembered Yi Shiwen's appearance, but they couldn't draw it. Everyone could only draw a rough figure, and the face was a massive chaos. They couldn't copy it from their memories. However, the temperament of the person in front of him made him instantly understand that it was undoubtedly Yi Shiwen. That's right, Yi Shiwen said lightly. You are by Daozi? You look pretty good. He looked at Bai Daozi. His strength was indeed solid, and he was not any worse than the geniuses he had seen in the heavens. Of course, in his current eyes, it was already very difficult for him to receive a not bad evaluation. If it was in the myriad heavens and realms, a not bad evaluation would allow a person with no foundation to rise to fame and become a figure that all the major sects would fight to recruit. However, Bai Daozi didn't know this. In his opinion, Yi Shiwen's unscrupulous evaluation of him was a kind of humiliation. Who did Yi Shiwen think he was? How dare he evaluate him like this? And the evaluation was only not bad. He was so angry that he wanted to laugh. Bai Daozi looked at Yi Shiwen and said coldly, I didn't come here to argue with you today. Why did you kill a disciple of my Heavenly Tao Union? What's so strange about that? He wanted to kill me, so I killed him. It's that simple, Yi Shiwen said, as if it was a matter of course. When everyone heard this, it seemed to be true. Whoever wanted to kill him, he killed him. This was a matter of course. However, they immediately realized that the person who was killed was not an ordinary person. He was a disciple of the Heavenly Tao Union and the Heavenly Tao School. They had only heard of Heavenly Tao disciples bullying others, but they had never heard of Heavenly Tao disciples being bullied. This was simply heaven-defying. Good. Bai Daozi was so angry that he wanted to die. Although he felt that Yi Shiwen was deliberately angering him, he still felt angry. He was truly angered by Yi Shiwen's words. This was because he could feel that Yi Shiwen's words were full of disdain and indifference. It wasn't a deliberate act. Instead, it was a genuine feeling. This made him even angrier. Yi Shiwen wasn't bluffing. It seems that you are really courting death. Bai Daozi forcibly suppressed his anger and said, Do you think you can kill a disciple of our Heavenly Tao? So what if I killed him? Yi Shiwen said coldly, It's a pity. You're considered a top character on the Emperor's substitute list. However, I'm afraid that you will disappear from the list from now on. Well, the heavens have the virtue of cherishing life. I will give you one more chance. If you retreat now, it's still not too late. If you don't leave, then don't blame me for being impolite. I will kill all of you without leaving a single one alive. Chapter 30:26. I think you're courting death. Don't you know what kind of existence our Heavenly Tao is? A figure flew out. Compared to the others, this figure was clearly shorter, only reaching their waists. However, his body gave off a terrifying aura, and his strength was terrifying. It was unknown what race he was from, but it was clear that he wasn't an ordinary character. Fairy Zhu's complexion suddenly changed. She could feel that although they were both quasi-emperors, this person's strength was enough to easily kill her several times over. The difference was too great. A powerful quasi-emperor was the first to attack. I think the one who's courting death is you. Fairy Tian Miao took a step forward and walked in front of Yi Shiwen for the first time. She had only taken one step, but she had already set off a monstrous, imposing aura. The monstrous, imposing aura of this little creature had been completely extinguished. It was unknown how many layers of his body protection aura had been shattered in an instant. His body had been forced to take several steps back before finally coming to a stop. Fairy Tian Miao only took one step forward, but she had completely destroyed the aura shield of this ferocious expert. What kind of power was this? This caused many experts who had been paying attention to this side to involuntarily suck in a breath of cold air. Just now, many people were doubting whether they had sensed wrongly. The dignified Fairy Tian Miao was actually following behind someone else. Was she an imposter? But now, it was clear to everyone that Fairy Tian Miao was not an imposter. But who exactly was this cyan-robed Yishuan? That short creature stared at Yishuan. He seemed to be in disbelief. He knew that Fairy Tian Miao and the other experts on the Divine Monarch Reserve list were very strong. However, he hadn't thought that the difference between them would be so great. She had forced him to retreat in a single step. Was this the difference between a peak quasi-emperor and an ordinary one? Fairy Tian Miao felt much better after forcing back a quasi-emperor. She had had enough of this period of time. Being carried around by Yi Shiwen like a little chick had completely hurt her self-esteem. It almost made him think that his cultivation had regressed to that extent. Now, it seemed that it wasn't that her strength had regressed, but that Yi Shiwen was too abnormal. Bai Daozi frowned and coldly said, "Fairy Tian Miao, are you planning to join in and protect this madman? Is he representing the Nine Nether Church?" Fairy Tian Miao said, "I don't need you to teach me how to do things. Also, you don't need to use your sex name all day long. Doing this is my personal idea. You don't need to use my Nine Nether cult and your Heavenly Dao sect all day long." Fairy Tian Miao mercilessly exposed Bai Daozi's thoughts. "Since you plan to protect this madman, then don't blame me for being impolite. Even if the Holy Church of Nine Nether comes looking for you, they won't be able to say anything." Bai Daozi narrowed his eyes, and a terrifying light erupted from them. In the end, Fairy Tian Miao had still gotten involved. It seemed that he had no other choice but to fight. "Brother Bai, can you give me some face and let Fairy Tian Miao off this time? What do you say?" At this time, a lazy voice came from the back of the market. Young Master Tian Ming slowly walked out. Bai Daozi's expression finally changed. The situation had become even more complicated. Fairy Tian Miao was already very troublesome, but he had a lot of people on his side. But with the addition of young Master Tian Ming, the situation was completely different. An existence of that level couldn't be created just by piling on people. "Young Master Tian Ming, I can give you face, but only if Fairy Tian Miao is willing to step aside." Hearing young Master Tian Ming, Bai Daozi couldn't help but sigh in relief. In any case, it was a good thing that he didn't have to fight young Master Tian Ming. "Young Master Tian Ming, my relationship with you doesn't seem to have reached the point where I need your help." However, Fairy Tian Miao didn't appreciate his kindness. Her anger was about to erupt. "This matter isn't something you can handle. I advise you to stay out of it. Otherwise, you will regret it. No matter what, I won't ignore this matter. Before, Bai Daozi chased after my best sister. This debt must be settled." Fairy Tian Miao turned to look at Bai Daozi. She had wanted to vent her anger a long time ago. But before, she was alone and didn't have much of a chance of winning against him. She could only try to make him hesitate. But now it was different. Others might not know, but she knew how terrifying Yi Shiwen was. Perhaps she could borrow his hand to solve this problem. Who said that she could only be used? The opposite was also possible. Young Master Tian Ming's expression immediately darkened. He didn't expect that Fairy Tian Miao would still ignore his good intentions at this point. How could he put his face in front of others? However, his expression slightly improved. He had already thought about it. When Fairy Tian Miao couldn't stop Bai Daozi, she would ask him for help. It wouldn't be too late to think about it at that time. In his eyes, Fairy Tian Miao was his prey. As for Yi Shiwen, he had already been completely ignored. Offending the Heavenly Dao sect meant that he was about to die. Bai Daozi coldly said, "Young Master Tian Ming, it seems that this is no longer a matter of me giving you face." Fairy Tian Miao transmitted her voice to Yi Shiwen. "Senior, I can help you deal with the others, but you will have to deal with this cow snout yourself." Yi Shiwen nodded and didn't comment. He just took a step forward and said, "Since you are so stubborn, then don't blame me for starting a massacre." White Daozi seemed to see Shiwen's expression turn cold for the first time. The Emperor Lord's murderous intent could turn the world upside down in an instant. Although he didn't know what kind of power this was, he could clearly feel the danger. "Go kill him." At this time, the short creature of the Heavenly Dao Union issued an order, and the powerhouses of the Heavenly Dao Union swarmed towards Yi Shiwen like fishes. They then pounced towards Yi Shiwen. Stubborn fool! Yi Shiwen merely took a step forward and did not make any move to attack. However, a scene that was even more terrifying than Fairy Tian Miao's earlier attack took place. A quasi-emperor who was the first to pounce on him was sent flying almost instantaneously, and the top-grade divine weapon on his body collapsed in an instant, turning into specks of light that filled the sky and dispersed in all directions. His flesh and blood also collapsed and turned into a rain of blood that filled the sky. What kind of terrifying power was this? There was no lack of quasi-emperor level experts among the experts of all sides, and they were almost scared to death. What kind of terrifying existence was this? He didn't do anything, but a quasi-emperor had collapsed and died. Could it be that the emperor is alive? It must be the emperor. Apart from the emperor, who else can have such great power? Everyone was dumbfounded at this time. At this time, they thought of Yi Shiwen's words, and no one thought that Yi Shiwen was just bluffing because he was afraid of Bai Daozi. His words were priceless advice, and he was trying to persuade them. Unfortunately, no one really cared. The other quasi-emperors of the Heavenly Dao Union also realized that something was amiss. However, it was too late for them to do anything because they had already arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. All kinds of terrifying attacks bombarded towards him. If these attacks fell on a person's body, even a peerless quasi-emperor, like Fairy Tian Miao, would be seriously injured. However, these attacks couldn't fall on Yi Shiwen's body at all. When they were a foot away from Yi Shiwen, they suddenly exploded and turned into a rain of light that filled the sky. They couldn't even get close to Yi Shiwen. In fact, many experts could see that Yi Shiwen didn't even use his magic power, and only used the laws to completely nullify their attacks. No matter what kind of attack they launched, it was useless. Yi Shiwen walked over step by step, and his expression was calm. A wisp of flame emerged from his body and instantly burned the sky. Wherever the quasi-emperors passed, they were all enveloped by it. These quasi-emperors used their divine tools to resist, but the divine tools were also instantly burned. After a while, their bodies began to emit green smoke, and their flesh was completely burned. Their primordial spirits struggled out of their bodies and wanted to escape. Although this would greatly damage their primordial chi, it was better than dying here. Swish! Yi Shiwen directly waved his sword chi, and these primordial spirits that wanted to escape were instantly killed. The hundreds of quasi-emperors of the Heavenly Dao Alliance were all killed in a few breaths. From now on, the Heavenly Dao Alliance would no longer exist on the Celestial Pole Island. Everyone's breathing completely stopped, especially young Master Tianming, whose face was completely pale. From the beginning, he didn't think much of Yi Shiwen, and thought that he was just a person who was about to die. Only now did he realize that it wasn't certain who the person who was about to die was. His limbs were ice cold, and he was drenched in cold sweat, as if he had been fished out of cold water. From afar, he looked very frightening. Behind him, the old servant hiding in the shadow was also completely stunned by Yi Shiwen's divine might. Fairy Jiangzhu and the other people of the Heavenly Xian Pavilion were even more scared to death because they had mentioned this person's name before. Now that they thought about it, wasn't it an act of courting death? Killing a quasi-emperor was just like cutting melons and vegetables. Would it bring an unimaginable disaster to the Heavenly Xian Pavilion? And even the Heavenly Xian Pavilion might be destroyed because of their actions? Senior sister, what should we do? A male disciple looked at Fairy Jiangzhu in a complete daze. It should be fine. This senior is so powerful. He shouldn't be calculative with us. Chapter 30:27. It should be. Fairy Jiangzhu's face turned pale with fright. The speculation in her mind was like mushrooms after a spring rain, and she couldn't stop it at all. If it was really as she guessed, then they wouldn't even know how they died. Fairy Tian Miao's reaction was even more direct. At this time, she finally realized that something was wrong. The person in front of her was probably not as simple as a quasi-emperor. He might even be an emperor, and there was a very high possibility that he was, even though it was impossible for an emperor to appear on the Celestial Pole Island. The barrier of the Celestial Pole Island couldn't be destroyed even by a sovereign emperor, let alone others. Therefore, it was impossible for a sovereign emperor to sneak in. After all, such a thing had never happened in countless years. Yi Xuan didn't have any special expression after easily killing hundreds of quasi-emperors. As an emperor, the level of laws that he could mobilize was not something that those quasi-emperors could imagine. Yi Xuan just walked step by step towards Bai Daozi. At this time, Bai Daozi's expression suddenly stiffened. He had already realized that he had absolutely underestimated the strength of the person in front of him. Not only was this person very powerful, but he was also very ruthless. Even though he knew that they were disciples of the Heavenly Law sect, he still didn't show any mercy. Then, Bai Daozi gritted his teeth and said, "Even if you are really an emperor, so what? On the Celestial Pole Island, existences of the emperor level are not allowed. If you can come in, then the only possibility is that you are not at the peak and your strength is not at that level. Otherwise, it is absolutely impossible." Bai Daozi was also a talented and intelligent person. He almost immediately guessed all the possibilities. If Yi Xuan was really an emperor, then the only way for him to hide from the barrier was if he was seriously injured. If he was not at the peak, then he wouldn't be able to hide. Otherwise, the Celestial Pole Island would have long been occupied by those emperor-level experts. I'm afraid that an emperor who is not at the peak wouldn't be so confident. Bai Daozi also walked out step by step like an ancient god. His body also erupted with a powerful aura, which was not inferior to that of Fairy Tian Miao. In the Fortune Realm, although emperor lords were still high and mighty, they weren't as mysterious and unfathomable. Those true great sects all had emperor lords. After many people guessed Yi Xuan's identity, they all wanted to worship him. But this white Daozi actually wanted to go against the heavens and kill the emperor. Thinking of this, everyone felt like fainting. Even in the Fortune Divine Dynasty, where heroes and geniuses came forth in large numbers, it was rare to find someone who could do this. Of course, the prerequisite was that the emperor had been severely injured to the point where he was on the verge of death. However, the Yi Xuan in front of him didn't look like one. So where did Bai Daozi's confidence come from? It probably won't be so easy to slaughter imperial monarchs to attain the Tao with just a single Tao artifact. Yi Xuan slowly said as he looked at Bai Daozi. He saw through Bai Daozi's trump card with a single glance. He was someone who had truly slaughtered an emperor lord as a quasi-emperor. How could he not know? Even if an emperor lord was really on the verge of death, the strength that he could erupt with was still terrifying. Those who hadn't seen it would never understand. Although Bai Daozi was strong, he might not be as tyrannical as he was in the past. And he was not the great star emperor of the past. Bai Daozi's expression didn't change. The sword at his waist suddenly flew out with a clanging sound and hovered above his head. Suddenly, everyone felt the sword Tao laws of heaven and earth become much more active. Tens of thousands of sword chi appeared in the void, each as thick as a heavenly pillar that shot into the sky, bringing with it the terrifying pressure of a Tao artifact. Tao artifact? He actually brought a Tao artifact in. Someone couldn't help but exclaim in fear. At this time, everyone finally understood why Bai Daozi was so confident. He actually brought a Tao artifact in, and it was an intact Tao sword. Sure enough, the heavenly Tao was worthy of being the leader of the many great sects in the world. This kind of foundation was unimaginable. Bai Daozi had not yet reached the Emperor Lord realm, but he could walk the world with a Tao artifact. If he had the help of a Tao artifact, it was not impossible to slaughter an Emperor Lord. After all, a Tao artifact's attack could truly threaten an Emperor Lord. After all, The Fortune God dynasty was different from the myriad heavens. In the Fortune God dynasty, many great sects had emperor lords presiding over them. Tao artifacts were rarely used by those quasi-emperors. In the myriad heavens, there were very few emperor lords, so those peak quasi-emperors had the opportunity to wield Tao artifacts. This sword, could it be the legendary Taiyu sword? I remember now, it really is the Taiyu sword. Legend has it that Bai Daozi is actually the spirit of the Taiyu sword. A long time ago, the Taiyu sword was sealed in an extremely dangerous space. Later, the spirit of the Taiyu sword escaped, reincarnated, and was reborn as Bai Daozi. Now that you mention it, I also remember that some time ago, Bai Daozi disappeared for a period of time. It was said that he entered an extremely dangerous space. I think he must have found his true body by now. If an ordinary person used a Tao artifact, they would not be able to display its true power. The possibility of using it to threaten an Emperor Lord is also very low. But if it is his true body, then it is completely different. Many people suddenly remembered that Bai Daozi's origin was also extraordinary. He was the reincarnation of the spirit of a Tao artifact. So he was invincible and had cultivated to the extreme at a young age. In addition, if Yi Shiwen was really seriously injured like everyone had guessed, then there was a possibility that he would be counterattacked. Everyone looked at Yi Shiwen, but Yi Shiwen's expression was incomparably calm. It was just the resurrection of a Tao artifact, so it was not enough to make him feel any threat, even if he was seriously injured. This sword is a good sword. Taiyu a good name. Yi Shiwen could imagine how high-spirited the previous owner of Taiyu's sword must have been. Just the name itself gave off a feeling of boundlessness. Bai Daozi held Taiyu's sword, and his entire aura increased by a lot. Suddenly, the entire celestial pole island trembled, as if it would surrender to this resurrected Tao artifact. Everyone felt that this was the majesty of an Emperor Lord. Even if it was a resurrected Tao artifact, it could still reflect the terrifying strength of that Emperor Lord. Everyone present was very close to him, and they all felt the boundless pressure and terror. Their whole bodies were trembling. Everyone understood why Bai Daozi was so unyielding. It turned out that he had such confidence. If he had not encountered a freak like Yi Shiwen, then he would have been able to kill gods and Buddhas in his way. You are not willing to surrender even under the Taiyu sword? You are too arrogant. Although you are very strong in this situation, how much of your strength can you display? Bai Daozi said coldly. He was indifferent and ruthless. The Taiyu sword in his hand made a clanging sound, and he suddenly waved it. Suddenly, an astonishing sword chi shot out, piercing through the space, and exploded in front of Yi Shiwen. As soon as the Tao artifact moved, heaven and earth could feel its terrifying aura. Because a Tao artifact would inevitably mobilize the operation of the laws of heaven and earth. Everyone could feel the scene when the Tao artifact was used. This was the power of Taiyu's sword. One sword could pierce through everything, and even before it had truly awakened, it had already displayed its terrifying power. Bang! This attack was directly blocked by Yi Shiwen's hand. This terrifying sword chi could only leave a few white marks on Yi Shiwen's skin. Everyone there sucked in a breath of cold air and felt the urge to simply pass out. To be able to block a Tao artifact with his bare hands. Just what level had his fleshly body reached? It had truly reached an inconceivable level. Even the ancient emperors were no better than this. Bai Daozi's expression also became incomparably serious. He didn't know that the sword chi from the Taiyu sword was not bad. If Yi Shiwen had just become an emperor, it might have posed some threat. But now it was nothing. Compared to the blood-colored spear that had seriously injured Yi Shiwen, it was nothing. What kind of terrifying power is this? But such a strong person. How could he be seriously injured by someone? The power of an emperor. This is the power of an emperor. This attack completely alarmed the powerhouses on Celestial Pole Island who had not come. They all opened their eyes in shock, and their gazes directly looked over. It was as if they wanted to pierce through space and see what was happening on this side. You are too arrogant. Bai Daozi's expression became more and more serious. He slowly spoke, and suddenly, the tens of thousands of astonishing sword chi above his head suddenly looked like a huge dragon, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws as it pounced towards Yi Shiwen. Each of these sword chi could easily kill a quasi-emperor, and they were also a threat to an emperor. Now, all of them poured towards Yi Shiwen. It was unknown how many years of sword chi had been accumulated, but at this moment, all of them burst out at once. Boom! A series of astonishing explosions occurred, and the tens of thousands of sword chi completely submerged Yi Shiwen. Explosions rang out all around him, and suddenly, the space was shattered into pieces. Endless chaos was forced out. This was because the laws of Good Fortune Realm had been specially reinforced. Otherwise, it would have been enough to destroy the entire Celestial Pole Island. Is he dead? Everyone's eyes widened. This attack had made them all tremble in fear and shock. In their opinion, this attack was enough to annihilate the world, and it should be able to slaughter an emperor, even if it was just a seriously injured emperor. However, just as everyone was still guessing, they saw a palm stretch out from the endless aftermath of the explosion. It stretched out 2 fingers and directly caught the terrifying Tai Yu sword that had fallen from the sky. Clang! A sound like that of metal colliding came from the collision. This attack has been caught. Is this the power of an emperor? Too strong. Chapter 30:28. Yi Shiwen stretched out 2 fingers and stopped Bai Daozi's astonishing attack. It was just 2 fingers. This sword could split the entire Celestial Pole Island in half if it was outside. Even if its power is suppressed by the enchantment, this sword is still extremely terrifying. However, this sword was caught by 2 fingers. Is this the power of a real emperor? Sure enough, the difference between an emperor and a quasi-emperor is too big. Bai Daozi's complexion suddenly changed. The person in front of him was really terrifying. He had confirmed that this person was indeed an emperor. Moreover, this emperor had just become an emperor. He was probably not the weakest among the emperors. No wonder the other party came even though he knew that he had set up an inescapable net. In the eyes of an emperor, it didn't matter how many quasi-emperors came. They were just a group of ants. If he did not have the Tai Yu sword with him, he would not even have the right to fight against him. He would have been easily defeated by him, like everyone else. I didn't want to start a massacre, but it's no longer up to me now, Yi Shiwen said slowly. This was the principle of his life. Don't cause trouble. Don't be afraid of trouble. This had even become a kind of Tao for him. Since he had provoked them, there was nothing to be afraid of. He didn't think that the Heavenly Law Church would let go of this matter easily unless the other party had suffered enough. Only then would it be possible. In the past, he could force the original demon race and other emperor inheritances to bow their heads. That was because he had made these races suffer. He had used his strength to prove that he was not to be trifled with. Otherwise, these powerful inheritances wouldn't have given up so easily. In their dictionaries, compromise was perhaps only suitable for a small number of forces. Everyone was horrified. Everyone could feel that Yi Shiwen had unleashed his killing intent at this time. He wouldn't hesitate to kill the people of Heavenly Taoism, even if they were people of Heavenly Taoism. After all, an emperor would become a terrifying killing machine if he were to be disregarded. Don't say such nice words. Even if you kill me today, you will still die in the hands of my Heavenly Law Church in your current state, Bai Daozi said while gritting his teeth. However, he couldn't back down at this moment. Boom! Before White Daozi finished speaking, he swung the Tai Yu sword. Suddenly, a sword aura seemed to transform into a continent of swordsmanship, directly blasting towards Yi Shiwen. This is not how you use a Tao artifact. He didn't choose to resist the Tai Yu sword aura head-on. The dark Bodhi divine hand appeared on his palm. He simply raised his hand and pressed it down slowly. There was no brilliance or terrifying fluctuations, but the Tai Yu sword aura collapsed with a loud bang. This sword energy was powerful enough. However, it wasn't enough for Yi Shiwen. Even though he was seriously injured and couldn't mobilize his true strength, His opponent wasn't an emperor lord after all. Yi Shiwen stretched out his hand and grabbed the Taiyu sword. Everyone held their breath as they stared blankly at the scene in front of them. Yi Shiwen wanted to seize the Taiyu sword with his bare hands. He wanted to seize the Taiyu sword with his bare hands. Don't even think about it. Bai Daozi forcibly stopped the Taiyu sword in his hand. However, he still felt as if the Taiyu sword was about to separate from his body. A powerful suction force almost pulled the Taiyu sword from his hand. For a moment, the entire scene seemed to be in a stalemate. Bai Daozi seemed to have protected the Taiyu sword. He used his status as a spirit artifact to forcibly control the Taiyu sword. However, the crowd's astonishment didn't stop. Bai Daozi was the owner of the Taiyu sword, and he was the one who used it. Yet, Yi Shiwen had forced him to this point. However, this stalemate seemed to last for a long time, but in reality, it only lasted for a few breaths. Yi Shiwen moved again. His hand suddenly grabbed, and Bai Daozi seemed to be frozen in place. He couldn't move at all. He could only watch as Yi Shiwen used his bare hands to seize the Taiyu sword. Boom! In Yi Shiwen's hand, the Taiyu sword instantly erupted with a shocking sword light. Waves of shocking clanging sounds rushed into the sky, and the terrifying sword power directly entered the endless void of the universe. In Yi Shiwen's hand, the Taiyu sword truly erupted with its ultimate power. The entire celestial pole island trembled under the pressure of this peerless Dao tool. Many of the tyrannical creatures on the island all knelt, trembling under the power of the Dao and begging for forgiveness from the heavens. Everyone present, regardless of whether they were willing or not, truly felt the eruption of the Dao power at close range. Many of the weaker cultivators knelt on the spot. They were forced to kneel by the laws of the Dao. This was a kneeling to the heavens. Fairy Tian Miao's body suddenly erupted with a Miao character. It bloomed with a dazzling light, blocking the crushing power of the Dao power of the Taiyu sword. On the other side, only young Master Tianming's life, character, and Bai Daozi's Dao character barely blocked the Dao power of the Taiyu sword. Once the true power of the Taiyu sword was unleashed, only 3 people remained standing. Everyone else knelt, and some even wanted to kneel as low as possible because the lower they were, the less they would feel the fatal Dao power. At the same time, everyone looked at the 3 people in the field enviously. Although some of them were also quasi-emperors, they were far inferior compared to these 3 people. The unaffiliated people's methods were extremely outstanding, and they even had the Dao character on their bodies to protect themselves. Clearly, these were the Dao characters condensed by emperors to protect themselves. Otherwise, they would not have been able to withstand the power of the Dao tool. And in the center of the field, Yi Shiwen was like a god of creation, standing tall in the field with an invincible aura. Sure enough, Dao tools can only truly erupt with enough power in the hands of emperors. Compared to emperors, quasi-emperors are far inferior. Everyone couldn't help but think. The Dao power of this sword even triggered a rebound from the boundary of the celestial pole island, which immediately suppressed it. No one knew who left the boundary on the celestial pole island, but it could suppress the power of emperors. It suppressed the light of the Taiyu sword, making it much dimmer. But it still looked extremely dazzling. The sword power even penetrated the boundary and directly spread into the vast universe. A ray of light that looked like a substantial Dao light flashed and swept over the celestial pole island. It wanted to see what was happening on the celestial pole island, but in the end, it gave up because it couldn't see through the boundary. This is the Taiyu sword. Yes, it must be the Taiyu sword. In the void, an invincible and mighty existence opened his eyes. He had been waiting on this celestial extreme island for dozens of years. He was in the vicinity and didn't move at all. It was as if he had been here since ancient times and nothing could disturb him. But when the sword power of the Taiyu sword appeared, it instantly woke him up from his cultivation. How can the Taiyu sword erupt with such a powerful Dao power? Could it be that someone forced Bai Daozi to this point, forcing him to burn his own primordial spirit to activate the Taiyu sword to this point? He thought a lot, and many thoughts flashed through his mind. That was all he could think of. Apart from the emperors, only by Daozi could activate the Tai Yu sword to this point by burning his own primordial spirit. However, he really couldn't think of anyone who could force Bai Daozi to this point. There were only a few people who could pose a threat to Bai Daozi this time, and there shouldn't be anyone who could force Bai Daozi to this point. He couldn't understand it, but this matter immediately raised his vigilance. Bai Daozi could be said to be the leader of this generation of disciples in the Heavenly Dao sect, and he was expected to take over the position of sect master in the future. Otherwise, how could he, an emperor, come to protect Bai Daozi? Not only did he have to ensure his safety, but he also had to warn others not to attack Bai Daozi. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be any accidents. He had a Dao tool to protect him, and the word Dao was fused into his body. How could he be so miserable? But there were too many things in this world that were uncertain. He suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. Roar! Bai Daozi let out a low roar, and the word Dao on his body continued to burn, blooming with amazing light. The word Dao on his body was resisting the Dao power of the Tai Yu sword. It turned out that he was fighting against himself. No matter how he thought about it, he felt very sad. This Tao character, Yi Shiwen's eyes lit up. An ordinary Tao character naturally wouldn't move him. However, this Tao character was different. This Tao character was the origin of everything. It seemed to be the origin of everything. It was the origin of the world. This word Dao shouldn't be the original body. It might be a copy of an ancient word, but even so, it was already no less powerful than an ancient word condensed by an emperor. If this was the original body, how powerful would it be? He suddenly remembered that Fairy Tian Miao had mentioned before that the foundation of the Heavenly Dao sect was the word Dao. They also used the word Dao as their name, and they claimed to have mastered the Heavenly Dao. That was why they were called the Heavenly Dao sect. Thinking about it this way, the origin of the word Dao was obvious. Yishuan didn't hesitate and reached out to grab the word. Since he had already offended it, it didn't matter if he offended it a bit more. He felt that if he wanted to recover and break through to the fourth realm, it would all depend on this word. Ah! White Daozi screamed miserably as his body shattered inch by inch. He burned inch by inch until he turned into light in the sky. At the same time, the word Dao in his body was pulled out bit by Yi Shiwen and separated from his body. Boom! There was a huge explosion, and Bai Daozi exploded into a ball of light in the sky. Chapter 30:29. Bai Daozi had died a tragic death at the hands of Yi Shiwen. The entire place was silent. Only the Tai Yu sword was constantly emitting clanging sounds. It seemed as if it was mourning. Its tool spirit had fallen. Although it had lost its consciousness, it could still sense it. No one dared to breathe loudly. Who was Bai Daozi? It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was famous all over the world. In the future, there was hope for him to take over the position of Heavenly Dao. At the very least, he would be a great elder. However, he had died here. He didn't even have the strength to fight back against Yi Shiwen. If they were in his place, their fates would have been even worse. Especially young Master Tianming. Although there were only 2 people left standing, he felt as if he was being stabbed by a thorn. Although his pride didn't allow him to kneel to the emperor, he wouldn't have a place to cry if he was killed by Yi Shiwen at this time. One must know that this guy didn't even give face to the heavenly Taoism, let alone the Heaven's Fate cult. At this moment, he truly understood what it meant to have one's heart higher than the heavens, yet one's life was thinner than paper. Before a true imperial monarch, all his pride and self-respect seemed so laughable. How could an existence that could be crushed to death at any moment have the qualifications to talk about self-respect and pride with another? Would people listen to the thoughts of ants? Definitely not. The difference between becoming an emperor and not becoming one was too big. His back was completely soaked, but he didn't feel anything. His whole body seemed to be paralyzed. No one could stop him, but he was completely frozen. Become an emperor. I must become an emperor. If I don't become an emperor, I'll be an ant. I'll be a puppet in the hands of others. This was the first time he had such a strong desire to become an emperor. because he had never realized that the difference between a quasi-emperor and an emperor was so huge. In the past, he had always thought that anyone who could escape from the hands of an emperor would be able to leave their name in history. It was too easy to leave one's name in history. But now, it seemed that anyone who could do that was abnormal. Fairy Tian Miao had the same idea as Yi Shiwen. When she saw Yi Shiwen killing the people of the Heavenly Tao Union, as if he was chopping melons and vegetables, she had a profound realization that she would never be able to raise her head in front of these people unless she became an emperor. On the other hand, the other people's senses were even more intense. It was as if they were about to pass out from the stimulation of this feeling. Although they were considered to have stepped into the upper echelons of this world, the number of times they could see the emperor in action was really not many. Moreover, it was such a wonderful battle. Although it was only a short time, it was enough for them to remember it for the rest of their lives. Yi Shiwen took the Taob character into his hand. He didn't think as much as the others. This Taob character contained countless great Taos. It was the origin of everything in the world. If it was really as he had guessed, even if the word Tao was just a copy, its value would still be immeasurable. It had a huge effect on his recovery and breakthrough. After receiving the Taob character, Yi Shiwen turned around and entered the bazaar. Star Merchant was already trembling on the side as he waited. Originally, he only thought that Yi Shiwen was powerful. However, the current Yi Shiwen was beyond his reach. He couldn't understand how powerful Yi Shiwen was. Originally, he thought that Yi Shiwen was just a local tycoon. However, now that he thought about it, anything that the Emperor Lord casually took out would be a divine item for him. Senior, please accept it. Star Merchant offered a Chinkoan bag. For him, even if he didn't earn a single cent from this transaction, it would still be good. He could make an Emperor Lord owe him a favor. No matter how he thought about it, it was worthwhile. Moreover, he had made a huge profit. However, it was obvious that Yi Shiwen didn't intend to take advantage of him for no reason. He just gave him a lump of Thunder Source. Compared to the Thunder Source that was used as a deposit, this lump of incomparably pure Thunder Source was much bigger. It was the size of a fist. Although it wasn't big, it was indeed priceless. This transaction could be regarded as a fair one. He felt somewhat regretful. However, he had no other choice. Could it be that he had to force Yi Shiwen to accept it? Yi Shiwen turned around and left after receiving these medicinal materials that would be used for alchemy. Of course, many of these medicinal materials were actually superfluous. There were too many experts in this world. It was even possible for them to deduce the alchemy recipe based on the medicinal materials. In fact, they could even detect his injuries and so on. Yi Shiwen had used this method in order to cut off future troubles. Wait for me. Fairy Tian Miao was stunned for a moment when Yi Shiwen had just left the bazaar. She bit her lower lip and quickly followed him. Although Yi Shiwen didn't call her this time, her intuition told her that she should follow him. Therefore, she only hesitated for a moment. Then, she followed him. The departure of these two people caused many gasps in the bazaar. Many people couldn't help but gasp for breath. They didn't even dare to breathe in front of Yi Shiwen. They were afraid that Yi Shiwen would kill them on a whim. And they wouldn't even have a place to cry if that happened. Especially young Master Tianming. He felt as if he had dodged a deadly calamity. He didn't know whether he was disrespectful to the Emperor by standing there. However, he knew that he had survived this time because Yi Shiwen had completely ignored him. This made him feel extremely aggrieved. Could it be that he wasn't even qualified to be looked at? Your Honor, I didn't expect that you would be an emperor. Fairy Tian Miao took a long time to catch up with Yi Shiwen's footsteps. She couldn't calm the shock in her heart for a long time. She had thought of countless possibilities. However, she hadn't expected that he would be an emperor. No wonder he was so disdainful of the so-called monarch's substitute list. For someone who had already crossed the threshold, the list made by these people was a joke no matter how one looked at it. A real emperor was a real emperor. If he had passed, then he had passed. If he hadn't passed, then he hadn't passed. Everything was that simple. At this time, she had felt uncomfortable calling him Your Honor without any hindrance. She wouldn't suffer any losses if she called him that. She wouldn't suffer any losses if she died in the hands of an emperor. What's so strange about that? Yi Shiwen said, because the enchantment of this celestial pole island should prevent an emperor from appearing. Fairy Tian Miao didn't think too much about it and directly replied. She had put away her petty thoughts ever since she knew that Yi Shiwen was an emperor. All her petty thoughts were useless in front of an emperor. After all, people wouldn't reason with ants. Oh, I naturally have my own reasons for coming here. There are some things that you shouldn't know too much about. Yi Shiwen said. Fairy Tian Miao suddenly recalled that Yi Shiwen had said that he had been severely injured by an extremely powerful person. She had thought that it was something special at that time. But now, she had a horrified feeling after thinking about it. Yi Shiwen was already so strong. So, what kind of existence was the person who had severely injured him? She didn't even dare to think about it. She felt that the world was in despair. How could there be such abnormal powerhouses in this world? Yi Shiwen and Fairy Tian Miao quickly returned to the microcosm where they had been undergoing closed-door training. Everything was completely different when they arrived here again. Fairy Tian Miao consciously guarded on one side. Yi Shiwen sat cross-legged on the cloud bed and chanted a secret technique on the spot. Countless medicinal ingredients immediately flew out of the Qingquan bag and began to refine under the Nanming leaf fire in front of him. Fairy Tian Miao was dumbfounded. He didn't have an alchemy furnace. In other words, Yi Shiwen was using the world as his alchemy furnace. He was using the power of the world to refine pills for him. This was simply outrageous. As far as she knew, this was a possibility that could only happen if one's understanding of alchemy had reached an extreme level. She felt that her cultivation was growing as she watched Yi Shiwen refine pills with all kinds of skillful techniques. At Yi Shiwen's level, each and every one of his moves was in accordance with the heavenly way. Each and every one of his moves was the way. Therefore, she felt that her cultivation were slowly rising, even though she was just watching. She had made the right decision this time. She could follow an emperor and watch him refine pills. This wasn't an opportunity that she could have at any time. In the blink of an eye, Yi Shiwen had been refining pills for 10 years. Fairy Tian Miao also watched from the side for 10 years. Finally, she saw the pills slowly taking shape and exuding a strange fragrance. Fairy Tian Miao took a deep breath and felt that her magic power was rising rapidly. This was the ingenuity of alchemy. She had seen those medicinal ingredients. They weren't particularly top-grade medicinal ingredients. Even a quasi-emperor like Xing Shangzi could take them out. However, they had turned into such a pill in Yi Shiwen's hands. She didn't doubt that if she could swallow it, her cultivation would definitely rise. She might even attract the heavenly tribulation of an emperor. After a long time, Yi Shiwen opened his eyes and glanced at the pellet in front of him. He opened his mouth and swallowed the pellet. Immediately, he felt a warm sensation in his body and a surging power washed over his body. The extremely dark power of the curse in his body was also being eroded by this power. Originally, Yi Shiwen's cultivation was only on par with this power of the curse. He only had a slight upper hand. However, under the influence of the pill, the power of the curse was on the verge of collapsing. His physical cultivation itself was at the pinnacle. Not to mention the Phoenix regeneration technique was a powerful healing technique. Without the erosion of the curse power, his injuries could almost be said to be healed in the blink of an eye wherever the power of the curse collapsed. The faster his injuries healed, the faster his speed of recovery. Time passed quickly while he was healing. In the blink of an eye, it was time for the celestial pole island to reopen. Chapter 30. The boundary that had almost solidified above the celestial pole island was finally opened. Although it would only be open for a short period of time, this was the only time that the island would be open, and it was also the time for everyone to leave the island. Just like every time the celestial pole island appeared, this didn't change. Streams of light flew out of the island. Being trapped on this island for more than 100 years had indeed made many people depressed. Not to mention that there was a super terrifying big boss on the island, an outrageously tyrannical emperor. Compared to an emperor, they were simply creatures that lived in a different dimension. Yi Shiwen's ferocious might was still imprinted in their minds, and they would not be able to forget it for the rest of their lives. He did not even need to use his hands to slaughter a quasi-emperor. From the beginning to the end, White Daozi, who had a Dao tool and the word Dao to protect himself, had only slightly injured his hands and feet. Being together with such a peerless expert with an unknown personality and faction, they had no choice but to tremble with fear and leave as soon as possible. Perhaps only Fairy Tian Miao didn't think like this among these people. She was also shocked by Yi Shiwen's strength at first, but she soon discovered that Yi Shiwen wasn't an easygoing person, but he wasn't violent either. So long as they didn't provoke him, they wouldn't provoke him either. Emperor-level characters permeated all aspects of their Dao, and those who were temperamental would not become Emperor-level characters. As long as one had a good understanding of their temperament, Emperor-level characters were not that difficult to get along with. Especially in the past few decades, she also felt that she had gained a lot. Watching Yi Shiwen refine pills, watching him heal, and observing him closely, the harvest was naturally not small. Is it time already? Fairy Tian Miao saw that the boundary in the distant sky had disappeared, and even felt a little depressed. Yi Shiwen also opened his eyes and said, "It's time. You can go." Fairy Tian Miao hurriedly got up and said, "Thank you for taking care of me during this period of time, Senior." Although Yi Shiwen did not really teach her anything during this period of time, it was a rare fortuitous encounter for her to observe his Dao at such a close distance. "This is nothing. I've seen you fight before. I haven't fully understood it yet, but I've gained some insights. It might be useful to you." Yi Shiwen flicked his finger, and a ball of light submerged into Fairy Tian Miao's body. Fairy Tian Miao stared blankly for a moment. Then she reacted. She had already seen some of Yi Shiwen's insights. Yi Shiwen didn't really understand the cultivation techniques of the Nine Nether cult. However, he had the mysterious space, so he could deduce a lot of things from a few words. Many of them had opened up a different path. Moreover, there were many insights that she had never seen before. This made her ecstatic. Just these insights alone had saved her at least several thousand years of cultivation time. What she had been painstakingly searching for might just be something that an imperial emperor could easily see through. "Thank you, Senior," Fairy Tian Miao hurriedly said. "If I can step into the monarch realm in the future, it will definitely be thanks to Senior." Yi Shiwen glanced at her and said, "You don't need to thank me. After all, I didn't do anything. This can be considered as a token of my appreciation for ordering you around all these years. Well, you can go now. You can't participate in the following matters." Fairy Tian Miao suddenly thought of something, and that was the invincible monarch of Heavenly Dao stationed outside of Heaven's Pole Island. Once he received the news, he would definitely fly into a rage, and a battle between monarchs would be unavoidable. It would be tantamount to courting death if she were to get involved in the battle between these two emperors. "Thank you for reminding me, Senior. But please forgive this Junior for being rude. I still want to mention old matters. If Senior is willing to join my Nine Nether cult, then even the Heavenly Taoism may not dare to do anything to you." Fairy Tian Miao slightly raised her head and looked at Yi Shiwen. She clearly knew what these words meant. However, she had been very grateful for this period of time. She was a crafty person, but she wasn't a heartless person. She clearly knew the consequences of offending the Heavenly Taoism. If someone dared to kill her, the Nine Nether cult wouldn't let them off. She also didn't want to see this Senior walk into a dead end. Moreover, she knew that although Yi Shiwen had been recuperating all this time, a mere few decades weren't enough for him to completely recover to his peak state. The situation was disadvantageous to him. Moreover, this wasn't a peak quasi-emperor like she had initially expected. He was a genuine emperor. If such a person could be recruited into the cult, then the significance would be unimaginable. It would be like setting up a new mountain peak. In the fortune world, many great sects existed side by side. The competition between these great sects was also incomparably fierce. There was only one way for them to compete, and that was to see who had more emperors. In the Fortune God dynasty, It was the high and mighty emperors who had the most authority. They were like the radiance of the bright moon that ruled the entire heavens. As for quasi-emperors like them, even peak quasi-emperors, they were nothing more than sparkling flames. They couldn't be mentioned in the same breath as the emperors. When these quasi-emperors entered the fortune god dynasty, they would have the status of a feudal lord. When they entered a supreme sect, they would immediately establish their own sect and become a grandmaster. This was the ultimate goal of countless people's cultivation. Being able to escort an imperial monarch back was a great contribution, and there was naturally no need to mention the benefits involved. Yi Shiwen glanced at Fairy Tian Miao and said, "You don't need to say anything about this matter. Quickly leave." Yi Shiwen's aura gradually grew stronger. In the past few decades, he had forcibly restrained the recovery of his injuries because it was inconvenient to stay on this island. If his recovery exceeded a certain limit, he would be suppressed by the rules of this Heaven Pole Island. Not to mention, there was also the suppression of the restrictions. But now, he didn't have to worry about this anymore. Fairy Tian Miao bit her lower lip and said, "If Senior changes your mind, you can come to my 9-nether holy cult. I will take my leave then." Fairy Tian Miao's figure directly flew to the top of the island. As soon as she left, a terrifying aura enveloped the entire Heaven Pole Island. This aura was filled with extreme anger. When an emperor was angry, the earth would shake and the mountains would shake. Dragons and snakes would rise from the land. Everywhere was filled with destructive aura. The native creatures on the island, who couldn't leave, could only tremble under this terrifying aura. It's time to break free from these shackles. Yi Shiwen stood up from the cloud bed and said. For him, he had been restricted for a period of time. Naturally, he was shackled. And now, he was the last shackle. From now on, he could fly as high as a bird in the sky and as a fish in the sea. Although I haven't recovered to my peak, it's enough. It should be enough for a fight. Yi Shiwen's figure suddenly flew out. Suddenly, a big hand appeared in the sky and fiercely slammed down towards Yi Shiwen. It seemed as if it wanted to slap him to death. Clang! The sound of a sharp sword being unsheathed came from Yi Shiwen's body. In the void, a terrifying sword chi was unsheathed and cut the big hand in one fell swoop. It couldn't stop Yi Shiwen from flying out. After Yi Shiwen left, the Heavenly Pole Island began to slowly disappear into the void. Your Excellency, how dare you kill the people of my Heavenly Tao sect? A cold shout came, and a figure descended from the void. It was a tall figure with 3 heads and 6 arms. He looked like a legendary sage Shura. His body carried a monstrous and terrifying aura. In the surroundings, many experts of various forces who hadn't left yet were terrified when they saw the arrival of this sage. Shura's Sage Emperor. I didn't expect that he would personally receive someone this time. Who knew that he wouldn't receive anyone this time? I'm afraid he's going to be furious. I'm afraid so. How come I've always heard that Shura Sage Emperor is an invincible existence among those alien races in the outer domain? Why did he come back? I just heard from the disciples who entered the island that Yi Shiwen is also an Emperor. Now, 2 peerless Emperors are going to have a big fight here. Everyone was discussing. In any case, the Emperor was a high and mighty existence in their hearts. There was no way to determine who was stronger and who was weaker. So what if I kill him? Yi Shiwen said indifferently. His expression didn't change much. So what if I kill him? Over the years, I've rarely seen anyone who dares to be so disrespectful to my Heavenly Tao sect. Even if you are an Emperor, don't even think about escaping. However, I don't have the authority to punish you. You should come back with me to see Senior Brother. Shura's Sage Emperor said, Senior Brother has always been kind and benevolent. Maybe he won't kill you and will only imprison you for life. That's funny. If you have the ability, come and try. Yi Shiwen said indifferently. Stubborn. Shura's Sage Emperor looked at Yi Shiwen coldly and finally made his move. He blasted out a punch, and the rules of heaven and earth reversed. Everyone could feel it, and even see it with their naked eyes. Shura's Sage Emperor was known for his physical strength. He attacked with a shocking attack. Everyone could feel how terrifying this attack was. Everyone was afraid. The earth shook and the mountains shook. They all retreated far away. 6 paths of reincarnation. Yi Shiwen blasted out a punch, and a 6 paths of reincarnation fist formed behind him. He didn't show any weakness, and he directly punched out. Boom! The 2 peerless fist techniques completely exploded under the attacks of the 2 extremely terrifying people. They collided and devoured each other. This is just the beginning. Shura Sage Emperor was born with 3 heads and 6 arms. This was not a law world, but a real body. Therefore, every punch of his was able to exert its strength to the extreme. This punch didn't succeed. Immediately after, the remaining 5 punches blasted out. In an instant, the sky collapsed and the earth cracked. Chapter 30-31. The Shura Holy Emperor was born with 3 heads and 6 arms. Each of his punches contained a powerful force that directly reversed the flow of the laws, forming a reverse momentum. It was extremely terrifying. These laws condensed into particles that were divided and recondensed. Each of his fists was not materialized at this time, but the condensation of laws. The Shura Holy Emperor's strength was indeed extraordinary. He had definitely stepped into the peak of the first realm and was a powerful figure who had already touched the threshold of the second realm. Originally, for Yi Shiwen, who had truly stepped into the peak of the third realm and touched the threshold of the fourth realm, it was not considered a threat. In the Emperor realm, the difference between each realm was like heaven and earth. But now that Yi Shiwen's injuries had just recovered, it formed a confrontation. These 5 punches instantly blocked the sky and the ground, spreading in all directions. Yi Shiwen had nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Yi Shiwen did not move at all, allowing the 5 punches to bombard the void. There were sounds of tremors and destruction everywhere, and all kinds of cracks appeared in the sky. It was a scene of great destruction. Clang! A sword light appeared in Yi Shiwen's hand. Suddenly, countless sword techniques emerged at the same time. This sword light was like a monstrous momentum. It instantly turned into an endless river of stars and directly rushed towards the 5 fists. It seemed as if it wanted to completely explode and shatter these 5 fists. The Taiyu sword was as steady as a mountain. In Yi Shiwen's hand, it exploded with amazing power. This was the first Dao tool he had obtained in this world. Yi Shiwen did not want to reveal his identity for the time being, so he simply used the Taiyu sword to fight strong enemies. In the past few decades, the Taiyu sword had undergone preliminary refinement, but it was enough. It was enough. Rumble, the sword light, and the fists collided. They were both Emperor Realm techniques, and the void instantly collapsed. This is the Taiyu sword. The Shura Holy Emperor immediately recognized that it was the Taiyu sword that broke his attack that Bai Daozi carried with him. Some time ago, Bai Daozi had found his true body, and it had caused an uproar in the Heavenly Dao sect. Because of this, Bai Daozi had become the future successor of the sect master. Otherwise, the Shura Holy Emperor would not have personally taken charge of the Celestial Pole Island. He thought that it was foolproof, but who knew that he would fail at Yi Shiwen's hands? You actually dared to kill him and take the Taiyu sword. You're dead. The Shura Holy Emperor was furious, but before he could attack, Yi Shiwen had already rushed forward. He took a step and appeared in front of the Shura Holy Emperor. He traveled through space, as if he had traveled through time. He arrived in front of the Shura Holy Emperor instantly. Taiyu sword slashed out, and the sword rainbow shot up into the sky. It was as if it had pierced through the entire sky, wanting to cut down all the stars in the endless universe and blow up the sun. Behind Yi Shiwen, there seemed to be countless sword gods chanting supreme sword scriptures. Everything about Sword Dao was completely reflected in Yi Shiwen's sword. Although he was not a swordsman, his understanding of the sword principle far exceeded everyone's imagination. When Yi Shiwen slashed out with his sword, the laws of heaven and earth seemed to have been replaced by Yi Shiwen's Sword Dao laws, which bombarded the Shura Holy Emperor. The Shura Holy Emperor immediately felt that Yi Shiwen's understanding of Sword Dao had reached an unimaginable level. The names of many Sword Dao experts flashed through his mind, but it seemed that none of them could match up to the person in front of him. But by the time he reacted, it was too late. All the aura he emitted was nothing in front of Yi Shiwen's sword. He was defeated again and again, completely defeated and disintegrated. By the time he reacted, Yi Shiwen's sword was already in front of him. Clang! Yi Shiwen's sword strike seemed to have struck on a piece of metal. A steel armor appeared on Shura, Holy Emperor's body. The patterns on the armor were simple and unadorned. No one knew which era it was popular in. Each pattern contained a great path. It was the Shura Holy Emperor's personal Dao item. He was most proficient in close combat, and this Daoist robe had greatly increased his combat power. In the end, Yi Shiwen's sword was unable to break the Dao tool. How dare you use the Taiwest sword to slash me? The Shura Holy Emperor was not a pushover. He suddenly opened his eyes, and his aura suddenly soared. His figure seemed to have grown a lot taller, like a giant standing in the sky. Coupled with his 3 heads and 6 arms, the demon god that had existed since time immemorial, his strength soared in an instant. The Shura Holy Emperor was overjoyed when he saw that Yi Shiwen dared to approach him. The nomological laws on his Daoist robe became more and more intense. Countless heaven and earth's vitality was absorbed, causing the aura energy around his body to become more and more intense. Take my Shura Holy Fist. The Shura Holy Emperor's voice was cold. His clothes fluttered in the wind. This time, he was finally in front of Yi Shiwen. It was enough for him to display his greatest advantage. Shura Holy Fist. Hiss. It is said that the Shura Holy Emperor relied on this fist technique to become invincible in the world. He finally succeeded in becoming an emperor. Who knows how many foreign experts have been killed by this set of fist techniques? It is said that it also contains the Shura Holy technique. I wonder if it's true? Seeing that the Shura Holy Emperor was finally going to use this fist technique, everyone was shocked. This was because this fist technique had created too great of a reputation. All 6 of his fists danced out at this moment. Each of his fists contained a different Dao. These 6 fists were like a formation that sealed everything up. The Shura Holy Emperor's aura sword. He did not seem like a creature of this world. Instead, he seemed like the most terrifying monster in the world. These 6 fists came crashing down like 6 huge meteors. They shattered everything and tore Yi Shiwen into pieces. Shura Holy Fist? Yi Shiwen's countenance didn't change. For others, this fist technique was truly earth-shattering and earth-shattering. However, it wasn't necessarily so for him. In an instant, Yi Shiwen also punched out. This punch turned into countless fist shadows. It was like the projection of an endless world. Boom! The fists of both sides collided. You want to block my Shura Holy Fist with just one punch? The Shura Holy Emperor's eyes widened. His breathing was like thunder. He tried to increase his strength and blast out endless Dao trajectories. I'm not just blocking it. I'm going to counterattack. Yi Shiwen sneered. Then, everyone saw a terrifying scene unfold. Yi Shiwen's fist directly broke through the Holy Shura Fist. It seemed as if it was tearing the sky apart, and it directly hit the Shura Holy Emperor's body. It's impossible for you to break through my Taoist robe with your strength. The Shura Holy Emperor sneered. Even though he was hit, he did not panic. This was because Yi Shiwen's Taiwest sword had not been able to break through his defense. Bang! However, the Shura Holy Emperor was sent flying before he could finish his sentence. It was as if he had been attacked by some terrifying force. He felt his entire chest churning. Blood was in his throat. He almost spat it out. How is this possible? His strength is so much stronger than before. He immediately reacted. It wasn't that his strength had weakened. It was that Yi Shiwen's strength had increased. At this time, he remembered that in the information he had received, Yi Shiwen seemed to be seriously injured. That was why he was able to stay on the Celestial Pole Island. He was originally very happy. One was in peak condition, while the other was seriously injured. His condition was even lower than the limit of a sovereign emperor. There was no suspense about the outcome of this battle. This was also the reason why he attacked with lightning speed. However, he didn't expect that after leaving the celestial pole island, Yi Shiwen didn't need to suppress the recovery of his injuries. He recovered a lot in a short fight. You only understand now? Isn't it a little too late? Yi Shiwen's indifferent voice came from all directions, and he directly caught up to the Shura, Holy Emperor, who had been blasted away. As his strength recovered, Yi Shiwen's methods became more and more diverse. He was definitely not limited to this. The Taiwa sword in Yi Shiwen's hand suddenly slashed down. The sword light seemed to have transformed into a mountain range. It fell from the sky and could split the Shura Holy Emperor into pieces in an instant. How can he be so powerful? I'm going all out. The Shura Holy Emperor's aura was suppressed to the limit. It was as if Yi Shiwen alone had sealed all the laws between heaven and earth. The reason why a sovereign emperor was so much more powerful than a quasi-emperor was that a sovereign emperor could control all the laws at any time. A quasi-emperor could only fight with his own laws. How could a person compete with heaven and earth? In a battle between sovereign emperors, to a large extent, this was also dependent on this. Especially when there was a huge suppression of realms, it would form a terrifying gap in combat power. Now, Yi Shiwen had displayed such a crushing gap. At this time, the Shura Holy Emperor understood that the person in front of him was definitely not easy to deal with. Yi Shiwen was not as simple as someone who had just entered the Sovereign Emperor realm. Even if he was seriously injured, he couldn't let his guard down. A huge domain formed around the Shura Holy Emperor. Within the entire domain, the Shura Holy Emperor used his domain laws to compete with heaven and earth. It made up for the part of the law control that Yi Shiwen had taken away. Boom! Yi Shiwen opened his palm. His 5 fingers turned into a mountain and directly smashed down, striking into the Shura Holy Emperor's domain. It was unknown how many laws of the Great Tao were contained in each finger. It was unimaginable how powerful it was. Under this attack, the Shura Holy Emperor's domain was almost shattered. It couldn't be blocked at all. The Shura Holy Emperor could only watch as the big hand ruthlessly smashed into the Shura Holy Emperor's chest. Puff! The Shura Holy Emperor finally couldn't control it this time. He spat out a mouthful of blood. His whole body streaked across the sky like a meteor and flew backward. Chapter 30-32. The experts from the various sects who were watching the battle from afar felt a chill run down their spines. Especially young Master Tianming, who had just returned from the Celestial Pole Island. His scalp went numb. Initially, when he saw Yi Shiwen beating up the Heavenly Tao Union's quasi-emperors, he was shocked and terrified, but he didn't think much of it. It wasn't strange for an Emperor Lord to beat up a quasi-emperor. However, what was truly frightening was that Yi Shiwen could beat up the Azura Holy Emperor even though he had yet to recover from his serious injuries. Although the situation wasn't completely one-sided at the beginning, this trend became more and more obvious as time passed. Although the Azura Holy Emperor wasn't a veteran Emperor Lord, he had been an emperor for more than 100,000 years. His prestige had long been deeply engraved in everyone's hearts. But now, this legendary figure was being beaten up. It was conceivable that Yi Shiwen's strength wasn't limited to emperors, but emperor lords as well. The same thought emerged in everyone's mind. Who the hell was this? The Fortune Divine Dynasty's history was too long. Old antiques could come out from anywhere, and there were too many to count. The Azura Holy Emperor's body almost collapsed in the void. This attack had seriously injured him. What was even more frightening was that Yi Shiwen's strength was still increasing. He was already so terrifying when he was seriously injured. What realm was he at when he was at his peak? At this moment, the Azura Holy Emperor truly felt that he was in huge trouble. Such an expert wouldn't be manipulated by others. However, he had already reached this point, so he couldn't afford to retreat. In fact, he didn't even have the time to think. Yi Shiwen had already rushed down to kill him. He descended from the sky like a golden-winged rock. The Azura Holy Emperor let out a long roar and forcibly gathered his spiritual power. His 6 palms condensed into fists and directly punched out. A destructive power erupted, especially the Taoist robe on his body. It seemed as if it was burning. All the attacks swept out in all directions like a tide. This shocking attack erupted in an instant in an attempt to salvage the situation. He wanted to blast Yi Shiwen away and give himself a chance to catch his breath. It's just a small trick. Yi Shiwen flew down from the sky and punched out in all directions. The 6 paths of reincarnation appeared behind him. He clenched his hand into a fist and punched out with the 6 paths of reincarnation fist. One punch shattered all of Shura Saint Emperor's attacks. Yi Shiwen's fist didn't slow down at all, and it directly landed on the Shura Holy Emperor's body. Pooh! The Shura Holy Emperor spat out a mouthful of blood along with some mincemeat. Even his internal organs had been severely damaged by the series of attacks. Boom! The Shura Holy Emperor slammed into the ground at lightning speed. It was as if a magnitude 10 earthquake had occurred. The ground cracked, and a huge, bottomless crack appeared. The Shura Holy Emperor had been thrown into the crack a long time ago. Hiss, what a terrifying battle strength. Oh my god! I'm not mistaken, right? How tyrannical is this Yi Shiwen? Heavens, if they were fighting in outer space, they could destroy an entire galaxy with a single strike. Compared to the Emperor, we are too insignificant. This won't do. We have to quickly inform the Supreme Headmaster. Let the Supreme Headmaster come personally and subdue this bastard. At this time, the remaining experts of heavenly Taoism finally panicked. At this time, even an idiot could see that the Shura Holy Emperor's battle strength was far inferior to Yi Shiwen's. Moreover, the gap would only get bigger as time passed. They hurriedly began to send messages in the direction of heavenly Taoism. However, at this time, they couldn't enter the battlefield of the battle. They were pushed out by an incomparably powerful aura. The area had already become a special domain, and it was automatically isolated. They couldn't even talk about being of any help. They could only worry helplessly on the sidelines. Yi Shiwen's expression was incomparably indifferent. The Tai-Yu sword in his hand let out a soft buzzing sound. Then, a sword key appeared out of thin air. It transformed into an astonishing sword rainbow in the sky. It pounced down on the spot like a big dragon and fiercely fell into that crack. Boom! It was another world-destroying sword strike. The entire area seemed to be on the verge of being destroyed by the two people's battle. Even though they were in the Fortune Divine Dynasty, where an emperor's battle strength was greatly restricted, they still had the ability to destroy heaven and earth. Whoosh! 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 The Tai-Yu sword in Yi Shiwen's hand spat out one shocking sword aura after another. It continuously bombarded the crack. Boom! 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 Everyone couldn't see what was happening in this crack. They could only hear loud sounds and see that this crack was expanding at an astonishing speed. One could well imagine how terrifying Yi Shiwen's sword chi was. Many people couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air as they imagined the scene of them falling on their bodies. Suddenly, just when everyone thought that the Shura Holy Emperor in the crack wouldn't be able to escape this calamity, roar! An angry roar came from the huge and bottomless crack. Then, a figure covered in blood jumped out from it. This figure looked extremely miserable. He was born with 3 heads and 6 arms. 2 of his heads had been cut off, and only 3 of his 6 arms were left. 3 of his arms were cut off. Blood sprayed everywhere. The golden blood fell down, and every drop turned into a vast ocean. Not to mention, there was so much Emperor's blood. Many people in the distance didn't even care about the battle between the 2 emperors. They only saw the sky full of Emperor's blood. Everyone who became an emperor had swallowed countless treasures. There was no part of their body that wasn't a treasure. Emperor's blood was one of the most precious medicinal materials in the world. If a mortal had the opportunity to swallow or even touch a little bit of Emperor's blood, they would be transformed into a peerless genius. Their future would be limitless. However, more people felt a sense of suffocation. Although they already knew that Yi Shiwen was very strong, It was beyond everyone's expectation that he would be this strong. Yi Shiwen's aura was still increasing, as if there was no end to it. No one dared to imagine how strong he would be at his peak state. The Shura, Holy Emperor, who was at the peak of the First Realm, couldn't fight back at all. Yi Shiwen felt that without the suppression of the Celestial Pole Island's restriction, his recovery speed was much faster than before. Even in the midst of a fierce battle, he could still feel his strength rapidly recovering. He felt a rare joy in his heart. In the Fortune God dynasty, strength was everything. Without enough strength, one wouldn't have the confidence to speak. The Shura, Holy Emperor, stared at Yi Shiwen and murmured, "With my blood body, I offer it to the heavens." The Shura, Holy Emperor, came from a mysterious and powerful clan. He had a special secret technique that ordinary people couldn't understand. Once he used it, it would be extremely powerful. As the Azura Divine Emperor used his secret technique, blood stopped flowing from his body. Even his sovereign blood, which had created a massive crater in the ground and made everyone's eyes red, instantly evaporated. Even his severed head and arm began to be sacrificed. Is this a sacrifice? Yi Shiwen looked at everything coldly. With his eyesight, he could naturally see that this was a sacrificial technique. There were similar techniques in the heavens and realms. However, one had to pay a price to obtain the kind of power one wanted. In order to fight against him, the Shura, Holy Emperor, had to pay a huge price. Even his severed head and arms might not be able to recover. However, he wasn't in a hurry. He breathed in and out for a long time. Every breath was like a long river, forming an amazing breath. Endless vitality was being sucked in and absorbed by him. Yi Shiwen, you forced me to this point. You will pay the price. The Shura, Holy Emperor, finally opened his eyes and stared at Yi Shiwen. Do you think you're my opponent just because you used this sacrificial method? You are too naive. Yi Shiwen didn't care. Perhaps, even if I use this technique, I may not be your opponent. Shura, Holy Emperor's indifferent face revealed a bitter smile of self-mockery. He had truly suffered in Yi Shiwen's hands. However, it's enough to delay you. He knew that heavenly Taoism should have received the news at this time. All the experts were on their way. As long as he delayed Yi Shiwen, he would eventually be able to see the scene of Yi Shiwen's death. Delay me? What a joke. You are using sacrificial techniques to become stronger. Don't tell me I haven't changed? Yi Shiwen sneered. The reason why he allowed the Shura, Holy Emperor, to sacrifice himself was that he also needed time to recover. Both of their strengths were increasing to the limit. However, he believed that his strength would increase faster than the Shura, Holy Emperor's. Shura, Holy Fist. The Shura, Holy Emperor rushed towards Yi Shiwen in one breath. Right now, he was in his peak state. He not only wanted to delay Yi Shiwen, but he also wanted to seriously injure him or even kill him. The remaining 3 fists shot out fist shadows that filled the sky. Each fist was pure gold. It was as if everything in the world had completely turned into a golden kingdom. It brought along a terrifying tide of heaven and earth. Yi Shiwen stepped out on the spot and directly crossed the layers of space. The Taiyu sword directly slashed out. Countless Sword Dao Law talismans instantly formed around his body. They condensed into a long Sword Dao river that instantly crashed down. Rumble! It was another shocking collision. The Shura, Holy Emperor's fist shadows that filled the sky were split apart by the Taiyu sword. All the illusions were broken. The sword fell, and ghosts and gods cried. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.